Welcome to 2026's Santa Cruz River Research Days. Very grateful for you all being here. I should have paused for applause. Welcome to 2026's Santa Cruz River Research Days. My name is Luke Cole. I am here representing Sonoran Institute. I direct our Santa Cruz River program and am very honored to be able to share this stage with so many talented researchers and creatives and thinkers. So thank you all for your interest in being here, your skills on display as you present your work here to a huge audience that is going across the country, including into Mexico. We certainly want to thank our sponsors. So this event is being sponsored by the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority of the state of Arizona, by Tucson Electric Power, and by Cox Communications, with additional support from the Friends of the Santa Cruz River, Pima County Regional Flood Control District, and Tucson Water. Additionally, Tucson Water donated lots of these very lovely, very tasty 125th anniversary seltzers that are over in these two coolers. So please help yourselves because we have a lot of them. Stay hydrated, folks. I also want to acknowledge our steering committee. It takes a lot of work to put on Santa Cruz River Research Days, and we are grateful for the enduring support not only of the Santa Cruz River team within Sonoran Institute and other programming within Sonoran Institute, but we also especially want to recognize Ben Lomeli. Ben, raise your hand. Yeah. Professor Michael Bogan right here. And Tony Palmer from Tumacacori National Historical Park. I know he's here. Where's Tony? Well, we'll give him a bonus round of applause when he comes back into the room. And we have acknowledged the support from the Tucson Language Justice Collective, as well as over here from Christian and Jake, who are going to be helping us out to make sure that the Zoom and in-room are flawless. So let's set the stage for where we are in Santa Cruz River Research Days. Thank you. We must importantly recognize whose land this is. We are on the land of the Tohono of the Pasquayaqui, and all of their predecessors. We are honored to be able to cherish and have our livelihoods and our recreation and our happiness in this land. And we are grateful for their partnership and the knowledge that they created and that endures today. A moment to talk a bit about Sonoran Institute. So we are a conservation nonprofit. We are based here in Arizona. We're based here in Tucson, but we work throughout the entire basin of the Colorado River. We have in the Colorado River watershed, the upper and the lower basin. I'm sure you're all hearing about this in the news right now. It includes parts of Baja California and the state of Sonora and Mexico. That's 40 million people, a lot of farmland, many tribal nations, 21 high biodiversity areas, and a huge, huge economy. For our part, Sonoran Institute, founded in 1990, our mission is to connect people and communities with the natural resources that nourish and sustain them. That's at the heart of what we do. That is at the heart of Research Days. We have programming throughout the entire Colorado River Basin. We have our work down in the Colorado River Delta. This is where the Colorado River should be going into the Gulf of California. And the work that we do with other NGO partners and academics works to make sure that that water, when delivered, goes as far as possible and is as researched as possible. We have the Santa Cruz River program right here. Give it up. We have so much work that's happening up and down this binational, trinational river. We have another program called Growing Water Smart. This program goes to municipalities that are seeking a better understanding of their current water portfolio and to envision how their water and land use future can be. That is happening in Colorado, in Arizona, in Utah, now in California, and along the US-Mexico border. This is a very impactful program. We are in a community right now that has benefited from going through the Growing Water Smart program. And One Basin is our fourth program that works to build tribal capacity, which is so often overlooked even when federal funds are made available. But we're here to talk about the Santa Cruz River, folks, aren't we? So this is a 90-mile riverbed if we're looking from the U.S.-Mexico border up to Pinal County. Within those two counties, we have 25 miles of the Santa Cruz River flowing in Santa Cruz County and about 15 miles flowing up here in Pima County. That is typically, perennially, as a result of 3 major wastewater treatment plants that were upgraded sometime between 2009 and 2013. As a result of those impressive, expensive, impactful upgrades, we have an ever-strengthened but still delicate, new in its recovery, wildlife corridor. So it's a major north-south, east-west migratory corridor for many critical and endangered federally listed species, like jaguar, like our amazing Gila top minnow, the Mexican spotted owl. We have the Pima pineapple cactus, so some very, very geographically isolated species that make the Santa Cruz River corridor their home. We gave you applause a little while ago, Tony. For Tony. And the work that Sonoran Institute does, we do to build and strengthen community. We are conveners. We're a small organization, but the work that we do is to bring people like you all in the room, virtually watching this in the future, to understand the value of the work that our community collectively is doing in the Santa Cruz River. All of this works towards conservation. We are doing all we can to create habitat for, even reintroduce endangered species like the Gila top minnow and the longfin dace. And the work that the Santa Cruz River program within Sonoran Institute does, in this case, the Santa Cruz River program is myself, Alex Corral over here, and Claire Zugmeyer in the back. The work that we do, yes, absolutely, guys. It is to create things like Santa Cruz River Research Days. It is to create things like our Living River reports. These are bilingual, annual digests of what's new in the Santa Cruz River. What are the challenges? What are the calls to action? We distribute these to about 15,000 households up and down the Santa Cruz River corridor, 11,000 of which we distribute up here in Tucson and in Pima County. So our work that we do doesn't stop at the production of these Living River magazines, or it doesn't stop at the end of Santa Cruz River Research Days. It goes on, and what we as a small little program and team strive to do is to share and amplify the work that you all do to reach bigger and bigger audiences, to reconnect people with this critically important natural resource that is the Santa Cruz River and its watershed. So our theme this year is a watershed of protection. There are some major anniversaries and forever ongoing important points of action and activity, including, and as will be discussed today in our keynote presentations, around the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. The SDCP really laid significant early groundwork for everything from land acquisition to safe harbor agreements, all of these things that collectively enhance, preserve, and recognize the importance of the Sonoran Desert. So we'll have Gade, the Director of Pima County Conservation Lands and Resources, speaking, and Supervisor Andrés Cano from Pima County District 5 will be speaking as soon as I put this mic down. Tomorrow, We will have a host of presentations that are talking about conservation and restoration in the San Rafael Valley. These are the headwaters of the Santa Cruz River that drain down into Mexico, at which point the river's bed bends westward and northward again, where it crosses by Ambos Nogales back towards Tucson. This is a critically important, breathtakingly beautiful, ever-threatened river valley, mountain river valley, that we will have a lot of conversation about tomorrow. And then on Thursday, I push the button and I know it's going to skip as soon as I push it again. Stuck. Hands off. What do you think? Is it going? There we go. On Thursday, as we do for research days, we have a field trip. This year, we've picked a location that is within the watershed, but it's down in Patagonia. And there we will be touring a conservation easement that is held by Borderlands Restoration Network, or managed by Borderlands Restoration Network. And this will be an opportunity to talk about 2 decades of really critical landscape conservation happening down there in Patagonia. Again, recognizing our many sponsors who help put this event on. We couldn't also do this without the attendance of, we're not talking into an echo chamber. We want to make sure that this community is here. So you all make this event happen as much as our very generous partners have done. So with that, I am going to pause to see if there are any housekeeping prompts or questions or concerns that came out of this. Yeah, Dan.
Just have a question about, I mean, it's amazing the work that's been done to restore the flows in the Santa Cruz, mostly through introducing treated effluent. And of course, in our local media here, especially lately, there's been a lot of talk about the wasted 14,000 acre feet that crosses out of the Tucson AMA, which of course is not wasted. It's in the Santa Cruz, helping to protect that riparian environment. So, I mean, how do you address that? Because there are a lot of people who are wanting to keep that 14,000 acre feet.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there will be conversations about this. Absolutely. So a lot of what I just talked about was discussing the Santa Cruz River from the border, right, from Ambos Nogales to the Pima County, Pinal County line. And that is where a lot of the municipal activity around the river works. However, the river flows up into Pinal County. And how that water that crosses the Pima County, Pinal County line is considered in policy and in recording of water volumes is being reinterpreted. It's being considered at a municipal, industrial, business versus natural. All of these things are in play. There are some great people in the room here who can have very effective, candid conversations with you, and I'm sure that you all will self-select quite easily. And I expect that some of the conversations that we have throughout the workshop, throughout the symposium, will address that as well. Thank you. Good question. Those are the kind of questions that we'll be talking about here, for sure. So now I'm going to introduce Supervisor Andrés Cano, who will introduce the conversation around the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan at 25. Supervisor Cano, welcome up.
I'm so grateful to be in a room with many familiar faces. For those of you who I've not had the opportunity to meet, my name is Andrés Cano, and I have the honor of representing District 5 on the Pima County Board of Supervisors. Prior to this role, I served in the State House, where I also was the minority leader and served on the House Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committee. And I am pleased to see that the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority is supporting today's programming, because it's an entity that I helped support as a state legislator when Governor Ducey at the time wanted a historic billion-dollar investment in a desalination project. You guys might remember this. I said, well, I'm open to it, but what are we going to get for short-term water conservation dollars? And we were able to negotiate a historic $300 million investment that has made its way to jurisdictions like Pima County and the city of Tucson. Over $211 million has been expended, and I just firmly believe that as we begin this conversation this week about investment in our natural resources, in our natural habitat, it is the people in this room, leaders, advocates, scientists, and community members who understand that water is not just a resource, it is our responsibility. District 5 is home to Midtown, Downtown, the South Side, the West Side, and the Pasquayaqui Nation, communities that have lived alongside the Santa Cruz for generations. This river carries our history, our culture, and our future. And it reminds us that in the Sonoran Desert, resilience is not optional, it is a way of life. One of the things that I love about being your county supervisor is that we get to rely on the experts to help influence decisions. And I want to thank one member of our community who represents District 5 on the Wastewater Reclamation Advisory Committee, Rebecca Perez. Thank you for being here, Rebecca. And I don't see Jonathan Hurst, but he's always, he's always here and in these same spaces. He serves as District 5's appointee on the Flood Control Advisory Board. So I want to thank him and Josefina Cardenas from the Barrio Kroger Lane Association, right adjacent to the Santa Cruz. Everything that happens along the Santa Cruz impacts the people of our region, but especially Kroger Lane, Josefina. So thank you for being here as well. The subject matter expert that I'm about to introduce is our incredible director, Gade, of the Conservation Lands and Resources Department. But before I introduce her, let me step back a bit. In 2001, Pima County made a strategic policy decision that resonates to this day. Over many years, community advocates and scientists worked on the reality that we were all beginning to face. Our desert is fragile, and it was being impacted by climate change, by development, by invasive species, and by a change in rain patterns. And those community stewards did something extraordinary. They worked tirelessly to get a unanimous passage of the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan by the Pima County Board of Supervisors. 25 years ago, the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan was not a study or a plan that was simply printed and left on a bookshelf to collect dust. It was a landmark set of policies that created the roadmap for how our county would center conservation, cultural and historic stewardship, and responsible growth. It has shaped how crucial county services operate at every level. Our flood control district protects our washes and our rivers. Our conservation lands and resources department manages over 260,000 acres of open space that have been conserved since 2001. And our development services department works within a conservation framework for both commercial and residential development, and it actively engages experts, partners, and the community in this work. And our regional wastewater department restores our aquifer every year. The Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan did not start from scratch. It was built on generations of experience and stewardship, of indigenous knowledge, of local leadership, of people who refuse to give up on our desert and on our river. And all of you here this week who are here are part of that story and that responsibility. My task on the board is to think and plan long-term. And what I hope you'll get from today is that your county needs you to be a part of that process, and you being here is already centering equity, science, and community voices. And as we work to continue restoring habitats, supporting biodiversity, and building climate resiliency that reaches every neighborhood from the riverbanks to the barrios, together we can ensure that the Santa Cruz is not only protected, but restored, not only remembered, but reimagined, and not only surviving, but thriving for generations to come. It is an honor to chair the 25th anniversary of the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan. District 5 is really where a lot of this land print originated landmark originated from, starting with Supervisor Yetman to Supervisor Grijalva to Supervisor Richard Elias and everyone else that's come through. And I know that what I have learned in my time in District 5, I was a staffer in the district for about 8 years before I had the fortune of being able to be county supervisor. What I am most impressed about environmental justice and conservation in our community is that we care, and it drives people crazy sometimes because we are going to hold people accountable, and we are not going to be afraid to stand up for what is ours. And celebrating 25 years to protect our environment, to preserve our desert, our stories, and to restore what has been lost is the commitment that I bring to this group. And this is not scripted, and so I hope my chief of staff doesn't get me in trouble, but one of the first votes that I had as your county supervisor was a vote against a data center proposal that some of you might have heard, Project Blue. This last couple of weeks, we have started to see the leveling of that beautiful Sonoran desert next to the county fairgrounds where this data center is going to be built. Of course, our heart breaks to see this kind of long-term, my heart breaks to see us making short-term decisions that are going to have long-term consequences. And we're going to need you to continue paying attention to what kind of economic development we're going to say yes to and what we are going to say no to. I'm so proud of the environmentalists and the advocates who oppose Project Blue from a water mindset, right? When these data centers are sucking up our aquifers across the entire country, but particularly in our desert, when there are over 50 of these in Maricopa County, it is the people of this county, of this community that influence the decisions that are made at the local level. And I know it's chaotic at the national level, at the state level, because none of it ever really makes sense. And especially at the state, having spent 8 years there, there is no manual for dealing with this legislature. But it is all of you who can absolutely impact local policy. And even though we were not successful in stopping Project Blue, we have been able to ensure that the $20 million that we got from that land sale and now the ongoing revenue, about $7 million per year in property taxes, are going to fund smart things. We have an entirely new department being created in the health department that is focused on environmental health and environmental justice from these Project Blue proceeds. That is a good thing. We have the opportunity to invest in neighborhood infrastructure to the tune of $2 million out of that 20. That is a good thing. I can keep going down the list, but the most important thing you're here to listen to is the expert who we were so lucky to steal from the state of Arizona, an ecologist and an environmental planner. Tremendous experience in overseeing environmental and cultural compliance, tribal consultation, and projects of public interest requiring diverse stakeholder input. Director Gade has been a fearless partner over our short year together, and I am so grateful that all of the efforts to celebrate the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan in the year of 2026, we've had already a momentous year, have been spearheaded and led with the support of Director Gade. So now I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Supervisor Cano, and welcome. Good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here for the Santa Cruz River Research Days, and especially this year when we're thinking about it as a watershed of protection. That phrase feels really right for this moment because we're also celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan. So today, though, I want to think about this in a little bit different way. A lot of times with anniversaries, we can be really tempted into telling nice, clean stories. Looking backward, organizing the milestones, and congratulating ourselves for what's been accomplished. And there's a place for that today. We definitely should be celebrating the SDCP. But I also want to acknowledge that the path hasn't been smooth. The SDCP emerged because the region was forced to confront the limitations of fragmented project-by-project decision-making. Its success is rooted in learning from those difficult moments and choosing a more intentional landscape scale approach. So with that, I want to begin somewhere a little less orderly because the landscape itself isn't orderly, and the Santa Cruz River is a feature of our landscape that has never let us forget that. The Santa Cruz can seem like a barren channel in many places. Some people know it as a corridor in the urban network, as part of the loop, as a place for bird watching and restored reaches, or just as a line on the map. but rivers have long memories. In 1983, the Santa Cruz reminded this region that it's not background scenery. It's force, habitat, history, risk, and connection, all of those, all at once. So that flood damaged communities, altered lives, and exposed how deeply our infrastructure and our neighborhoods are bound up with the form and behavior of the landscape. So this image is looking upstream from St. Mary's Road during the flood. It's a reminder of that moment. After a week of rain associated with a tropical storm, the Santa Cruz River and Rillito Creek both produced the largest measured floods in Tucson history. 13 people died, hundreds were injured or rescued, and the total flood damage was estimated at over $200 million in 1983 dollars. That's one way to get into today's story, because the SDCP begins with a recognition that still matters. In a place like Pima County, landscape is not a blank slate for growth. It's a resource and a legacy to be stewarded with humility and care. The public response to the flood is important. Pima County's flood-prone land acquisition program began in 1984 in response to the October 1983 flood. At first, the focus was on purchasing flood-damaged properties and helping flooded property owners relocate. However, Chuck Huckleberry, then the director of the Regional Flood Control District, expanded the next phase of the program to include undeveloped properties and upper watershed areas. His vision was to protect land in order to slow floodwaters upstream before they would reach the developed areas. The acquisitions included a focus on Cienega Creek in particular, and that became today's Cienega Creek Natural Preserve. With this initiative, the focus shifted to flood mitigation that also preserves riparian habitat, open space, groundwater quality, and upstream floodplain function. And that matters because it shows a pattern that would become central to the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan. Flood control decisions could also be an open space decision. Public safety measures could also protect habitat. And a response to risk could become a long-term investment in landscape function. So if we want to understand the SDCP, we need to remember that its roots go deeper than the year 2000. In fact, the story of conservation in this region begins before county government, before modern planning, before any of the policy tools we now take for granted. Indigenous peoples have lived with, cared for, and understood these lands for millennia. The Santa Cruz watershed is not just a physical system. It's also a cultural landscape shaped by generations of relationship, memory, knowledge, and use. That matters because one of the clearest lessons we're still learning is that landscapes are never only biological or physical. They're cultural as well. Pima County is developing a draft tribal consultation policy that says this plainly. Cultural and biological resources are inseparable and must be understood in relationship to the physical environment. Protecting a place also means protecting the water that sustains it, the plants used there, the animals that move through it, and the relationships that give it meaning. By the late 20th century, Pima County was also building its own more recent stewardship history. There were open space preservation efforts, concern about riparian systems and floodplains, and a growing awareness that the region's ecological and cultural resources were under pressure. At the same time, the county was growing quickly. Development pressures were reshaping the landscape in real time. So by the 1990s, Pima County was already learning that economic growth, habitat, water, and cultural heritage could not continue to be managed separately. There were earlier steps toward open space conservation policy in Pima County. One of the most notable came in the early 1970s from a debate over urban sprawl and open space preservation in the Catalina foothills. In an area known as Rancho Romero, located along Cañada del Oro Wash and east of Oracle Road, with breathtaking views of the Santa Catalina Mountains, a developer proposed rezoning to build housing for a community of up to 17,000 people. There was a loud and sustained public outcry. Thousands of people signed a petition pushing for protection of the open space. The Board of Supervisors responded by denying the rezoning application. And soon after that, the public approved a bond to acquire and preserve the land. It wasn't quite that simple, but ultimately the land became part of Catalina State Park, or actually became Catalina State Park. So that earlier action still echoes. In 2022, the Board of Supervisors began setting aside $2 million a year for acquisition of conservation lands. In 2025, the board approved spending 3 years of the funding, so $6 million, to acquire a 109-acre parcel adjacent to Catalina State Park, which we've been calling Kelly Ranch. The county has long sought to protect this area from development. It's important because it is part of the view from Oracle Road over to the Santa Catalina foothills and really helps protect that entrance to the park. So that acquisition of Kelly Ranch is directly linked to the earlier multi-agency effort to acquire Romero Ranch and create Catalina State Park in the 70s. So that's a really useful reminder. Long before the SDCP was an acronym or a name, Pima County residents were already saying that some landscapes just shouldn't be consumed by growth. The late 90s and the early 2000s led to a defining moment. The immediate issue, as many people in this room know, was rapid growth colliding with the addition of the cactus ferruginous pygmy owl to the endangered species list. In the late 1990s, there were missteps by the county in impacts to pygmy owl habitat and to the culturally important Valencia site from 2 separate county projects. And both demonstrated the consequences of addressing conservation only after conflict had already occurred. But what made that period historically important was not only those conflicts, it was that people saw in that conflict an opportunity to do something larger. The breakthrough was recognizing that compliance focused on one endangered species or type of resource could not be the whole framework. Instead of approaching things on a case-by-case basis, the real question was how to build a model capable of holding together ecology, land use, economics, culture, and governance. So this is what made the SDCP more than a response. It became a framework and a model. Mayveen Marie Behan was central to this shift. She helped turn what could have remained a narrow, compliance-driven moment into a much broader civic framework. She helped people ask a different question, not just how do we get through this immediate crisis, but how do we protect a living landscape while still allowing a growing region to function and prosper? Around her was a wider circle of leadership, elected officials, administrators, conservation advocates, and public figures who helped create the space for Pima County to imagine a different path. Bruce Babbitt helped situate local conservation work within a broader Southwestern and national conversation. Raul Grijalva provided durable political support for conservation and public land values. Chuck Huckleberry helped translate vision into the long institutional arc of county government. And there was key board leadership willing to back something more ambitious than a patchwork of reactions. But Mayveen was the person who really made the process possible. She coordinated the main SDCP Citizens Steering Committee, which had over 80 people and hundreds of meetings over 3 years, the Science Technical Advisory Team, and a broad network of advisory and technical groups. This was a gigantic effort. More than 150 members of the science community participated or contributed to the science technical advisory team as the plan was developed. There were educational sessions, workshops, and lots of informal meetings with interest groups and concerned citizens. And Maveen was the center of all of it for the county. She was coordinating details, keeping people engaged, and pushing the plan toward integration into the comprehensive land use plan. People who worked with her still remember how persuasive she could be. Heard a few versions of one story. She sometimes started conversations with developers or county staff who were skeptical about why a habitat conservation plan mattered by first drawing a box and then an outline of a head, and she'd say, "This is you." And then she would add vertical lines, and she'd say, "This is you in jail if we don't have a plan." So it was pretty bold and funny, but it also made the point that the county needed a plan that was more durable, more comprehensive, and more honest about the landscape that it was trying to govern. The SDCP was unusual because it did not treat conservation as a side program. It integrated conservation science, land use planning, cultural resource values, working ranch lands, infrastructure, growth management, and long-term acquisition and stewardship strategies into one county-wide framework. That sounds obvious now because many of us have lived inside the framework for years, but it wasn't obvious then, and in most places it still isn't. The SDCP said conservation would not sit off to the side as a special interest or a late-stage mitigation step. It would become part of how county government makes decisions, where growth should go, what should be protected, how land should be acquired, how to design infrastructure, how working landscapes could remain intact, and how we think about the long-term health of the region. It was ambitious because it refused a false choice. It did not say conservation or economic development. It said that if we planned well enough, we could protect the most important ecological and cultural systems while still allowing the county to grow. So before the SDCP, many of these questions had been handled one permit, one project, one conflict at a time. With the SDCP and the conservation land system in place, the county had a larger map and a larger framework. And as Supervisor Cano mentioned, one reason the SDCP has endured is that it never belonged to just one office or section of county government. It depends on many departments and many forms of expertise. That's not a weakness, it's one of the strengths. It means that that plan became our operating logic, not just a document. So it shaped our planning and policy, the way county thinks about land use, development review, and where growth belongs and where it doesn't. It shaped our land protection and management through acquisition of flood-prone and conservation lands, through offering recreation opportunities, instilling stewardship obligations, and the recognition that managing protected landscapes is a decades-long responsibility, not a one-time transaction. And it also shaped our infrastructure, water, and landscape functions. We have projects for flood control, roads, trails, wastewater treatment, habitat, and riparian restoration that all become part of implementation of that plan. Pima County has a process that convenes staff from across the departments to review our capital improvement projects at 5 different stages, from initiation through design, construction, and closeout, to ensure that that coordination occurs. And it's also important to say that the public was not merely watching this happen from a distance. Voters demonstrated support for acquiring open space and priority cultural areas by approving bonds. That matters because it shows the SDCP was not an internal county government framework only. It rested on public trust and public willingness to invest in long-term protection. And public backing helped turn those values into geography. So today, conservation lands and resources is one expression of that integrated logic. The department is new in its present form, almost 2 years, but the work is built on decades of county practice. CLR exists because the county government recognized that the SDCP values needed specific focus, not to be treated as temporary or optional incentives or initiatives as resources allowed. So 20 years of SDCP implementation led to the recognition that conservation, stewardship, and long-term management required a permanent institutional structure. So one sign of the plan's maturity is that the county increasingly treats conservation not just as land acquisition, but as long-term governance through planning, stewardship, compliance, management, education, accountability, and public investment. One of the strengths of the CLR department is integrating the county's environmental education professionals with the land managers for natural resources, parks, trails, conservation areas, the Davis Month and open space, and cultural heritage areas, along with the technical experts on monitoring habitat condition, species status, and cultural resource protection. So yeah, this department covers a pretty broad swath of things. The Cultural Resources and Historic Preservation Office within CLR is an example of that maturity. One of the first initiatives I undertook was a reorganization of the office to create a preservation program in addition to the focus on compliance. We were able to repurpose some of our operating budget to add a staff position in order to expand the preservation programs tied to county conservation lands and the objectives of the SDCP. Nowhere is that integrated work more visible than on the ground. County departments, including development services, real property services, regional flood control, transportation, and CLR, often work together on projects involving proposed development, easements, trails, conservation lands, and important riparian areas. These collaborations are where the SDCP becomes practical. One example is a request that will be coming before the Board of Supervisors soon. An electricity provider requested permission to upgrade equipment in an easement across Pima County land, including a stretch that crosses the county-owned portion of Tumamoc Hill. With input from CLR, Real Property Services staff were able to negotiate an agreement to place the new larger infrastructure along Greasewood Road instead. So once that new infrastructure is in place, the power poles and the power line will be removed from Tumamoc Hill, reducing infrastructure in one of our conservation landscapes. So that's not the kind of example that usually makes the headlines, but it's exactly the kind of work that shows how a conservation framework becomes real through one alignment, one easement, and one negotiated improvement at a time. So the best evidence for the SDCP is not in a document. It's the landscapes that still function, places where the habitat still connects, the riparian systems are being restored, where scenic and cultural values remain legible, and public land has been protected in ways that shape the county's future. So at the same time, Pima County did keep growing, and that's part of what makes the SDCP notable. The plan did not stop change. It helped direct change and protect the places where conservation value was simply too important to lose. This map of the Mavine Marie Behan Conservation Land System shows how all the input from the SDCP meetings was incorporated into the Comprehensive Land Use Plan as the initial framework for implementation. The different greens and hatching represent different levels of habitat protections. And if development is proposed in those areas, a multiplier of land must be set aside. The blue color indicates the important riparian areas, and the purple arrows show the critical landscape connections which are the basis for maintaining wildlife connectivity through eastern Pima County. So this is where the bond story becomes visible in the landscape itself. Public support for open space and priority cultural area acquisition did not remain abstract. It resulted in actual places staying open, connected, and meaningful. The view of Gates Pass is an iconic image for many Tucsonans and visitors alike. It's one of those places where people feel the value of open space immediately, even if they don't have the policy language to describe it. Pima County first patented land in the Tucson Mountain Park area from the Bureau of Land Management in 1929 to protect it from mining and keep it open to protect habitat and public use. In the 1960s, citizens motivated again to oppose the proposed reopening of the land to mining by the federal government. And then in the 1990s, the northern part of Tucson Mountain Park became a national monument and eventually part of Saguaro National Park. So acquisition of parcels to protect Tucson Mountain Park, including the Gates Pass viewshed and important wildlife corridors, has been an ongoing pursuit by Pima County and partners, including the Arizona Land and Water Trust. More than 1,800 acres in the area near Gates Pass were purchased because of the 1997 and 2004 Pima County open space bond items. So that's what I mean when I say the SDCP helped turn values into geography. The plan didn't simply express a conservation ethic, it helped create the tools and public commitment needed to protect actual places. But if we stopped there, we would still be telling only half the story. One of the most important lessons of the SDCP has been that landscapes are never only ecological. They're also cultural. They carry history, memory, ancestral relationships, sacred meaning, and the material traces of human life over thousands of years. This is why the county's present work on cultural resources matters so much. The Cultural Resources and Historic Preservation Office within CLR is not simply about regulatory review. Its role includes preservation programs, managing conservation easements, public interpretation, land acquisition recommendations, site stewardship, and management planning on our conservation lands. So in other words, the county is formalizing the idea that cultural stewardship is part of land stewardship itself. So protected landscapes are not empty. They're inhabited by history, meaning, and relationship. The Raul M. Grijalva Canoa Ranch Conservation Park is a strong example of a county property that embodies the values of the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan. The Conservation Park comprises 4,800 acres of the original San Ignacio de la Canoa grant, and historic Canoa Ranch is listed in the National Register of Historic Places. The site includes Canoa Lake, historic buildings, rentals for special events, a pollinator garden, and the Yonza Trail. But those facts only begin to describe why the place matters. The Canoa Ranch property brings together a historic ranch, cultural resources along the Santa Cruz, protection of floodplain and open space land, public interpretation, habitat mitigation, reintroductions of rare plants and fish species, birding, environmental education, and cultural history tours. You'll hear more about the CLR environmental education team and how their work increases connections to the Santa Cruz River later this afternoon. So the majority of the land at Canoa Ranch is technically owned by the Regional Flood Control District, but the area is managed as a single landscape by CLR through a cooperative agreement. CLR manages the public interface, the maintenance of the historic structures and displays, the pollinator garden, the lake habitat, and as well as the open space and the in lieu fee site for wetland and riparian mitigation. So that's exactly the kind of integrated stewardship the SDCP encourages. And there's something especially fitting about this place. Raul Grijalva was born and grew up at Canoa Ranch. And today, the property that bears his name demonstrates the value of the SDCP framework: cultural history, ecological restoration, river stewardship, public education, and conservation management all held together in one landscape. And it was a really fitting place for us to sign the Urban Wildlife Partnership Agreement for the Santa Cruz River. All right. But if the first 25 years of the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan taught us how important it is to protect whole landscapes, the next 25 years demand that we get better at listening across those landscapes too. That means that stewardship is not only technical, it's relational. It means treating tribal nations as sovereign governments and recognizing that cultural, biological, and spiritual relationships to place do not fit neatly into our administrative categories. The county's current cultural consultation initiative is being designed to institutionalize that understanding. Its purpose is to create a more respectful and meaningful government-to-government framework with tribal nations, one that strengthens stewardship of cultural and natural resources, supports access to county lands, and helps ensure that the next 25 years are informed by deeper collaboration. Our draft policy recognizes tribal nations as sovereign governments with deep and continuing cultural, spiritual, and ancestral relationships to the lands and resources of the region. It also recognizes that traditional ecological knowledge, when tribes choose to share it, can offer vital insight for stewardship of lands, waters, plants, animals, and the relationships among them. And it explicitly states that this worldview aligns closely with the SDCP's integration of biological and cultural conservation. So this is not a break from the SDCP, it's an evolution of it. The Middle Mile project is a good example of what early coordination can make possible. The Middle Mile is the fiber optic bridge between internet service providers and local connections. It's the backbone that helps expand and strengthen high-speed internet access. So Pima County's regional Middle Mile project is funded by a $30 million federal grant to create an open access fiber optic ring around the county's urban core, with completion expected in June 2028. This makes it economical for high-speed internet to be delivered to the outlying regions of the county. So multiple county departments are collaborating on the design and environmental review of the project. And if you notice, I didn't say, but this is 143 miles going through existing transportation rights of way. The Office of Digital Inclusion is the lead department, with technical input from Pima County IT, project design and construction, transportation, and conservation lands and resources. This goes through, I think, 30 partnering agencies' land also in these 143 miles. So the Cultural Resources and Historic Preservation team has been heavily involved in coordinating with state, federal, and tribal governments for this. We had very early integration of the Cultural Resources and Historic Preservation Office, which allowed consultation and survey work to start early in the project before the proposed alignment was finalized. And so that information that was received through consultation was integrated into the route development, so that all of the known cultural sites were able to be avoided through changes to the route or by using different construction techniques than originally envisioned. And so that's the practical value of early stewardship. It allows the county to build our needed infrastructure, but also avoid unnecessary disturbance of heritage resources. In this case, that early coordination is also estimated to have saved up to $1.5 million compared to the early estimates of cultural compliance costs. So that broader understanding of stewardship is especially visible along the Santa Cruz River. The Santa Cruz watershed may be the clearest place to see what the SDCP really means after 25 years. In the context of the river, rigid definitions begin to break down. Flood control land is also habitat. The habitat is also a movement corridor. Movement corridors are also cultural landscapes. So all this restoration results in greater public access. And then the stewardship has to hold all of that together at once. So that's one reason why this event matters so much. The Santa Cruz is not just a subject of research or restoration. It's one of the places where this county continues to learn how connected its responsibilities really are. A recent regional flood control district project shows what that looks like in practice. The district recently completed a project that builds on a long-term plan to provide wildlife connectivity in a critical landscape linkage. This is the one near Avra Valley Road and Interstate 10, and it's identified as one of the critical landscape linkages on the conservation land system map. It's an important place for reconnecting the access between the Tucson and Santa Catalina Mountains. And the Santa Cruz River, Interstate 10, and Railroad all created barriers to movement there. The Flood Control District recognized that the steep slope of the levee on the bank of the Santa Cruz River created an obstacle for wildlife crossing. In the first of its kind project, the district modified the levee to incorporate a wildlife ramp that preserves the levee function and also provides an accessible slope for wildlife. And I was recently at the wildlife ramp on the inaugural field visit of a regional wildlife connectivity stakeholders group that was convened by the Flood Control District. And I'll admit, I nerded out a little bit. I was thrilled to see that construction details I had worked really hard to finalize for a project when I was at ADOT had been shared and used again on the wildlife ramp. That was excellent. But I was excited not only by the engineering of the ramp and the fence, et cetera, but the details that were added to support smaller wildlife. So they used metal pipes to create shaded areas, refuges, brush piles for cover for small animals, and lots of plantings from the Pima County Native Plant Nursery. And so this is what the next generation of SDCP implementation looks like. Infrastructure that still performs its public safety function, but it's designed with movement, habitat, and landscape connectivity in mind. So the question is no longer whether this kind of integrated conservation works. The question is whether we will keep deepening it. The Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan deserves to be celebrated at 25, but not because it's finished. It deserves to be celebrated because it changed how this county understands responsibility. It taught us that conservation is not something separate from government, development, infrastructure, or community life. It's one of the ways a place learns to take care of itself. But the legacy is real and incomplete at the same time. The future will require stronger connectivity, durable stewardship of conservation lands, continuing the balance of growth and protection, deeper incorporation of cultural stewardship, stronger county tribal relationships, and continued attention to the Santa Cruz watershed as a living system under pressure. One of the clearest structural challenges ahead is that not all conservation lands are equally secure. So this map shows that from the original SDCP, the vision was to protect open space around the Tucson metro area by maintaining the legacy of working lands, especially ranching, with ecological objectives in mind. Today, Pima County has about 260,000 acres of conservation land, and roughly 144,000 acres of that total are in state grazing leases, which are shown in green on this map. The areas in tan are fee-owned county lands. There's also additional acres acquired by flood control under the flood-prone land program that are not shown. So these are the ones CLR is managing. Those green areas of state grazing leases are essential to maintaining large connected working landscapes, but they're also vulnerable because housing, industrial uses, and energy development can generate greater revenue for the state. So protecting the integrity of those landscapes over the long term will require not just continued county stewardship, but change at the state level. And that's an important reminder that the next 25 years are not just about continuing existing work. They're also about adapting the policy around that work. The present reality of the Santa Cruz River itself reminds us that the health of a landscape depends on whether we're willing to see the connections clearly. The dry riverbed is a daily reminder of both what has been lost and what remains unfinished. It reflects that conservation is not simply about protecting what remains, but about restoration, reconciliation, and rebuilding our relationship with the landscapes that define this region. So the SDCP is not the conclusion of that work. It's the framework that reminds us we still have much left to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Gade. We're probably going to have some Q&A if you don't mind sticking around a little bit. Yeah, I mean, if you don't mind, please. And as a reminder to folks online, you can add questions into the chat or the Q&A? Into the Q&A. So we will queue those up and make sure that they're answered. That said, are there any cues in the queue? Okay, please keep them coming. Meanwhile, if folks in the room have questions, I'll prompt with one.
Okay.
There's no end date on the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan, is there? It's just, it will be.
It continues.
Okay.
Yes. There's an Associated Endangered Species Act permit, the Multi-Species Conservation Plan, and that was signed for 30 years. And it's the 10-year anniversary of that this year.
Okay, well, the elephant in the room, of course, is Copper World, which I realize is in a weird area where, you know, it's a lot of different land ownership, but how do you deal with something like that in the conservation plan when it can do extreme damage to what you're trying to do for the rest of Pima County?
Yeah, it's something that the county continues to oppose because it is all on mainly private land at this point. The county doesn't have much control, but it is something where as there are options to give input and to work with the state on whether it gets additional land for putting tailings, how we're going to manage traffic across the experimental range going down into that area. There are a lot of places where the county continues to have input on it and try and ameliorate whatever impacts if we can't avoid having the mine there.
At the very end, you mentioned management of state lands, and it's inadequate. Do you have any specific recommendations and maybe ideas about how that could be made to happen?
There's been a few attempts at the state level to bring in conservation values into the state trust land system. None of them have gone anywhere yet. And so I think it is something that it's going to continue to be something we have to work at the state level. In the meantime, also looking at how Pima County is managing those lands, does it make sense for us to start looking at things like agrivoltaics where we are the ones that are coming in with what the state considers a higher and better use because it brings them more income? Can we do that in some of these areas and maintain the ecological values that we assumed those leases for? So there's a lot to do there and explore there.
Okay, so we had one person ask a question online. Are the individual towns, Moreno, Oro Valley, Vale, etc., within Pima County governed by the SDCP?
only if they choose to be. The city of Tucson recently agreed that they would honor the SDCP, the conservation land system, within their zoning decisions. Oro Valley's looking at doing that because it has been kind of a loophole before that sometimes people would, developers would try to have their projects annexed into cities because they might not have to follow then the mitigation ratios of the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan. But it was very exciting that Tucson actually did incorporate that into their zoning this year. And at least Oro Valley is looking at it. All right. Oh, sure. Well, one, by participating, we have so many environmental education programs and volunteer opportunities within the CLR department itself. So one, just to be involved and get to know that group of people of similar mind within the county. The other is Pima County is starting to look at a bond election again, coming up in 2027. And there will be items in there. We don't know what exactly yet, but there will be some in there that will support conservation lands. If you are feeling the urge to be political, and go talk to your supervisor and let them know how important these things are, that is another way to be involved. All right.
Kris, again, thank you so very, very much. So the next block of presentations has a geographic and content range that I think is going to keep everybody's brains zigging and zagging. We have presentations coming up about GIS and modeling techniques, as well as ecosystem restoration planning and economic assessments of the Santa Cruz River. So these are really going to take us through the whole river corridor in a way that will keep us on our toes for sure. As always, we will ask the presenters to please keep an eye on our interpretation team in the back of the room, because as we get going fast and SDCP and lots of acronyms, it takes a lot of time on their end. So please just keep an eye on our friends in the back. They'll let you know where your pace is at, and if you can try to incorporate that, it's going to make it easier for everybody in the room to understand your fascinating research anyway. So with that, the structure for going forward is going to be 20-minute blocks per person. The presenters will be speaking for 12 to 15 minutes or so, and it will leave plenty of time for Q&A. So to get that started, we're going to welcome up Garrett Smith from the University of Arizona, who will be speaking on 2 GIS models to identify areas for rewilding and conservation in this urban river corridor. Garrett, come on up.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you to the Sonoran Institute for hosting this great event. My name is Garrett Smith. I work at the libraries at the University of Arizona in the Data Cooperative Unit. And today I'll be presenting about 2 GIS models that we've created as part of a research grant that we've received in the last year. So the grant itself is called the Santa Cruz Tucson Urban Wildlife Refugia. It's a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation America the Beautiful Challenge grant. And so we're looking at developing or identifying locations for wildlife refuges within this urban corridor. So our study site, which to go back to, is actually a 1-mile buffer around the center line of the Santa Cruz River as it flows through Tucson. So kind of to orient you on the map, the northern water course is the Rito, and then our southern boundary, so it's just south of the Rito River for our northern boundary. Our southern boundary is just around Irvington. So that's kind of our study area for this. I'd like to acknowledge that our research is taking place on the ancestral homelands of the Yaqui and the Oldham peoples. This is a community-driven stewardship grant, so there's a lot of community input, a lot of outreach into the community. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then kind of the vision for this is to engage the community in discussions around where we could actually locate some of these urban wildlife refuges or looking for these areas to do some kind of restoration work. So these are the partners in the grant. So along with the University of Arizona, we've been working with Pima County Flood Control, Tucson Bird Alliance, Santa Cruz River, Wilderness Society, the Santa Cruz River National Wildlife Refuge, Sonoran Institute, and then Reconcilian in El Rio. And so we interact with these partners throughout this entire process. So the basis of our models are based on these two ideas of rewilding and conservation. So rewilding is this kind of understanding that landscapes change over time. There's development, there's impacts, there's natural disasters, human-created disasters, things like that. And sometimes these landscapes need help to come back to a natural state. So we think about these places of something that might need our help to bring them back to a natural ecological state. And then conservation, we think of as those places that do not really need our help. They are functioning ecologically. And so when we originally started this project, we were only looking at the rewilding aspect. So where are locations within our study site that we could look for that would need some kind of intervention? So the PI on the project is a landscape architect. So integrating some kind of landscape architecture intervention for a rewilding effort was kind of the main point of our grant and our GIS analysis. As we started talking with our partners, there was an idea that we actually wanted to identify locations that we should preserve as well. So where are places that we could actually conserve that were already in kind of a natural state? And that was the development of these two disparate GIS models. So just a few terms to go over here. I won't use acronyms. So in GIS, we use suitability analysis. So this allows us to use multiple data sets. So landscapes are complicated, right? So we have ecological processes, we have social processes, we have economic processes. So we want a way that we can add all of these processes together to create a map that will show us where are locations that are suitable for whatever intervention that we're trying to develop. The way that we do this is through multi-criteria decision analysis modeling. So basically we can take all these data sets and then reclassify them so that they're at a similar scale, and then we can add them together. So it's an additive model. And the reason that we reclassify is we want things to be in a similar scheme. So I have an age and I have a weight. They're measured in different units, right? Years and pounds. So I can't logically add those together. So we need to reclassify these things into a scheme that actually makes sense so we can compare like for like. So the rewilding model, and this is the model that we started with, was based on the Landscape Architecture Foundation's Landscape Performance Guidebook. So the Landscape Architecture Foundation developed this landscape performance guidebook for landscape architects that they could use once they were working on a project to monitor different parts of that project, whether it be ecologically, socially, or financially. One thing that's unique about our model is that we decided that we should reverse engineer that, and instead of using this landscape performance or these indicators to monitor a site once it's been chosen, well, what would happen if we use these indicators to actually select areas, right? And so instead of an opportunistic kind of process, we're trying to forego that and say, okay, how can we use these indicators to develop a model that would point us towards where these places need to be rewilded? And then our conservation model, on the other hand, is based more around the scientific literature. So we're basing it on more of the ecological principles of a landscape, or what we would call a matrix, habitat fragmentation, and then corridors between habitats. So we used kind of the literature to build this model. So one's kind of a no ideas bad in a brainstorm, and the other one is definitely based on like the scientific literature, so more grounded in kind of the science talk. Just some kind of overview of kind of what GIS data looks like if you're not familiar with it. So this is not an old like Atari video game. This is an actual data set that's in our model. So GIS, we use raster-based files. Raster-based files are just like a digital photograph. So each of these individual cells has a value. So just like a red, green, and blue value for a digital photograph, all these cells have values. So this is a data set that we use. It's called the National Land Cover Database. That's from the USGS. So this was actually taken kind of just northwest of downtown. So this is where it's zoomed into. So this is what this data looks like. So this is a class. It's a categorical data set. And then we have a numerical or a continuous data set. So this is tree canopy coverage. So the darker cells represent low canopy coverage. The lighter cells represent high canopy coverage. So these are these diverging data sets, right? I can't really add a percent to a class. So that's why we reclassify. And so I won't bore you with this too much, but this is kind of how reclassification works. So you have kind of a data set, an input raster is what we would call it in our model. We do some kind of transformations, and in this case, we reclassify. And then the reclassification values are based on how high or low the score should be as far as like suitability. So how suitable or non-suitable is this characteristic of this data set for whatever phenomenon we're studying. So our example above for canopy, so high canopy, and this is our kind of rewilding effort. So anything with a high canopy, we're actually reclassifying as low. It's already got trees, right? It doesn't need an intervention. Anything with low canopy, we're classifying as high. There needs to be an intervention there. Plant more trees, more ground cover, something like that. And the same thing with our NLCD data. So anything that's like highly developed, so it possibly could be a parking lot, we might want to think about rewilding that area. Anywhere that's more natural, we don't. So we would classify that as lower. So now we have a common scheme, right? We've gone from categorical and percentage data to 1, 2, 3 for both data sets. And then so what we can do next is take those reclassified data sets, and then we can actually now logically add them together. So we use what's called a weighted sum tool. So we can add these values together. And if we kind of look at this idea here of the simplistic nature, we can see that if I was looking for like the most highly suitable area for this rewilding effort, I could see that these cells, so 6 is my highest value. I have two raster data sets where the highest value is 3. 6 is my highest value, so we would probably focus on these areas where it's 6. So that's kind of how this works. So these are our suitability maps that we created for each of the 3 subcategories that are within the Landscape Architecture Foundation's guidebook. So we have environmental, social, and economic. So listed next to each of these maps is all the data sets that went into them. So some of this stuff we had to come up with. So like, location of disturbed sites, we used remote sensing to look for bare sites and things like that. So again, we kind of were brainstorming, how would we represent this like characteristic or this variable in a way? And you can kind of see like economic there's not a lot of data behind that one. But the way that we get over that is we normalize this. So everything's normalized from 0 to 1. So that environment with all of its variables doesn't take precedence over social and economic. And so when we add all 3 of these together, we get our final suitability map. So our final suitability map on the right here is the rewilding map. So everywhere in green is locations or areas that are suitable for some form of a rewilding effort. Compare that to the conservation map, which we used the 3 landscape fragmentation and corridor. And you can see there's definitely a difference between the two. So where we concentrate our efforts, or the areas that we should concentrate our efforts in, are diametrically opposed to one another if we're looking at what we're trying to accomplish with these models. And so here they are next to one another. So again, you can see, and really like as a GIS person or a spatial person, you start to pull out some of the things, right? So like the washes are doing a lot of heavy lifting in the more conservation-based one. And those are things we kind of have to think about, you know, like we're not saying there's a lot of ground truthing and stuff that has to go on past this. So kind of the community aspect of this is, so we were working with an advisory council. So it's made up of some people that are in this room, nonprofits, some government agencies, community members, people at the university. So I developed an Esri story maps where we put our data online. So it's hosted on an online map. People can interact with it. They can zoom in and out. I also developed a methods section. So these PDFs that you can download that have all the variables that we created, what we did to them. So we're trying to be very transparent with the process. And then the final thing is we have a survey. So for every variable and every decision that we made, people have the opportunity to make comments about that. So like, should we have done this way? Should we have weighted it this way? Did we reclassify it correctly? All of those things we're allowing people to give input on that. So that survey closed 2 weeks ago. It's the end of the semester, I'll get to it. Once the semester ends, and start to evaluate that, and then rerun the models based on that feedback that we receive, and then see kind of how those things differ. And so just as a kind of wrap up to this, so the community aspect of this, we do have a community-based survey. So these are 2 QR codes if you would like to participate, if you have not already. So the top one is the English, the bottom one is in Spanish. This is just an opportunity for the community to get involved. It's not the GIS survey, so you won't be too bored. But it is like to provide your feedback of like what you envision this kind of area to look like. And yeah, just to thank you to all the partners that have worked with me on this model. It's been about 1.5 years of fun, of me looking at that worm shape for a long time. So yeah, so thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. We do have a few minutes for questions, and absolutely please get your phones out and scan these QR codes. Like Garrett said, these efforts that are being done to evaluate the proper location for a refuge and understanding community preference, this is the best chance for us as Tucson, Pima County residents, or even folks that are interested in this area, to have your opinions and values and priorities known. That said, if there are any questions, we can definitely field one of those.
Okay, you did say that you had PDFs available of some of the work you've done. Are the GIS layers and the data sets available as well for people to look at?
They will be. So right now it's about 140 gigs of data. So we're trying to figure out where to host it right now. So yes, but they will be available to the public.
So people love easy clicking things. Do you have like an online petition that goes to 4 identified people, leaders, politicians, or anything that's in an easy form right now that, for instance, I could pass on to, my affinity group? I guess that's the question.
Oh, for the locations, you mean? That's probably better for Luke.
So, no, there is not right now. However, the question was, are there sort of easy click forms where it would go right off to Supervisor Cano or to Governor Hobbs or somebody like that that could say, hey, I support this effort? We are prioritizing now instead on in this larger refuge effort in understanding what the community's preferences and priorities are. So that we can make a far more informed and effective run at political support when the timing of it is right, better to right. Yep. You got me? I'll get you in a sec, Nick. Lee, did that get you?
I'm a little confused because we have these URL codes, but you said something about the survey closed 2 weeks ago?
So that was the GIS survey. So
Oh.
that was for our advisory council.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, these are still open.
All right, one more.
Oh, I guess I'm wondering at what point does land ownership, has that been included in the economics, or is that something to be able to overlay with the assessors map in some sense, to be able to, then be able to understand what the potential availability might be?
Yeah, so right now, the two, as far as like, we're trying to avoid like parcel identification, we're just area. Yeah, but we do in the model, we do have fair cash value, so that's under the economic for parcels. And we also have vacant parcels and vacant parcel by class, and we reclassified based on what we assume. Now, me as somebody that doesn't work for the county or the city would assume like maybe industrial is a little bit easier to obtain than like single family housing. So that's how I reclassified. But then that's what we're hoping to get out of the advisory council surveys, is that maybe somebody that's on the ground could say, well, this is not right or something like that. Also, I should have said, and thank you for asking for the clarification. So these maps are then going to inform the further community conversation. So these aren't like, this is exactly where we're doing this. This is just that first like boundary object or conversation starter with the community and other stakeholder groups to kind of like, does this make sense to you? Makes sense to me with like my secondary data sets, but does it make sense to you that you work in this community, you live in this community, you understand it?
Garrett, thank you so much.
Yeah,
That was
thank
great.
you.
Next up, we have continuation of this conversation. Dennis and Sascha, are you both speaking? We got two mics, perfect. So Dennis Nichols and Sascha Moran from the University of Arizona's CAPLA program will be speaking on 3D modeling of the Santa Cruz River in Tucson. Back and forth style? Okay.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, it's really great to be here. My name is Dennis Nichols.
And I'm Sascha Moran.
And we are both students at the College of Architecture at the University of Arizona. And we had a research project this semester looking at 3D modeling the river. Modeling the 3D river, or 3D modeling the river in Tucson. So our project was partnered with the Arizona Institute of Resilience and the Wildlife Refuge. So our other involvements on campus, I'm also a member of Epsilon Eta, the pre-professional environmental fraternity that does some work in the community.
And I'm also working exhibition design intern for the Museum of Arizona, as well as a community engagement ambassador at the Center for Creative Photography.
So Sascha and I are just entering our early career, and we're both students who are still figuring out our path. But I think I can speak for both of us in saying that we've been really fulfilled in our time at CAPLA, at the College of Architecture so far, just because of its deep roots in the Sonoran Desert and in the environmental context. Because as future designers, and we're both fourth year architecture students, we will be changing the built environment. And so it's really important to not only be informed on the environmental issues, but also kind of developing those values and of conservation. Because the built environment is inseparable from our natural environment, and both of these should be systems that are working together, which hasn't always been the case in the field of architecture. But in the short time we've been here, I've seen the absolute critical importance of the Santa Cruz to this community. And I'm really honored, we're really honored to be involved in this work. CAPLA overall, the emphasis on land stewardship is not only shaped by the beautiful landscape that we all share, but also by people outside of the art of architecture, like all of you. So, thank you. This is our mentor. She was influential in helping us complete this project. So, thanks, Mackenzie Waller.
So our project goals for this internship with the Santa Cruz River was to create a 3D digital model of the defined study area that Garrett was talking about. Currently, a model of this scope does not exist. So also one of our goals is to make this model publicly available for professionals and students, and to use this model to communicate design and planning ideas to community members. So we are also developing graphics and diagrams as well as 3D visualizations that the general public can use to understand the project and also to serve as a tool for outreach.
So the audience of this project is, we're creating this 3D model for the Wildlife Refuge design team to use as a base for modeling future interventions along the river. And so for that reason, the model, we wanted to have a higher level of resolution. And then the community stakeholders who will eventually be interacting with this model, this is a visualization tool to communicate those design plans that the design team brings. And these images are kind of examples of the graphics or the drawings that will be used to show designs from the Wildlife Refuge project.
So our research questions. Firstly, we asked ourselves, how can a digital model of an expansive area be created in Rhinoceros 3D, which is the software that we're currently using and that we have been using at CAPLA for the past 4 years? While working within the constraints of the softwares and others, meaning the size of the file and that it cannot be accessible for people and the public. And also, how can this digital model adapt to the challenging needs of the design team with the progression of the Wildlife Refuge project?
So why do we choose Rhino? Like Sascha said, we've been using this software for many years now in our education, but also Rhino is easy to use for professional architecture firms, and because it's easily compatible with open source softwares, and it has a full library of digital modeling tools that really create so many opportunities. It's accessible in pricing compared to competitors. And we see this as using a Rhino model, it's something that firms even in Tucson will be able to use.
Okay, so before choosing Rhino, we went through a bunch of other different rendering softwares. So we decided first to start with QGIS. It is a similar software that what Garrett was using for his research, but for us it was not working as well because it was not giving us the good resolution that we were looking for. And also we needed the model to be changeable and to make it adaptable for the design team choices. Also, we tried using ArcGIS, but the same was going on. The contour lines were too complex. There was too much data that would not allow us to use the patch commands properly on Rhino. So we decided that importing DEM files from USGS would be the best way to do it and creating a mesh system that would yield us well-defined topography.
And so we decided that our challenge is that with each DEM file, or the digital elevation model file, it yields one tile that contains just like a small amount of topography. And so our challenge was to combine all of those tiles together for this study area, with a focus of higher resolution at the location of the river, and then the surrounding context to have a lower level of resolution, because it's not going to be as visible in our drawings.
So the workflow that we followed was to first go into USGS data download to retrieve the EM files that Dennis talked about. Note the file untitled number and use the key plan to keep track of the DEM files. Then we needed to convert those files into meshes with Grasshopper and Bison, which are available on Rhino. And then to assemble every mesh and join all of the edges to create a continuous surface. Then we integrated into touch terrain context, and we added site context such as buildings and bodies of waters and roads.
And so this is a little visualization of our process, retrieving those DEM files from the USGS data download, and that's kind of the raster files. This is what they look like. And then taking each of those files and using a code for Grasshopper, which is a plugin to our software, to get those mesh outputs. And then finally, tiling those meshes together to achieve our topography base.
And after that, it was time to actually model the river to separate it from the context. So on number 5, you can see where all of the river is going on the site, on our study area. And on the 6th step, we are pulling that together with the context that we got from touch terrain.
Touch terrain is another open software.
Yeah, and after that, we extruded the building footprints that we got from Garrett. And by plugging that into Grasshopper, we also got the correct heights.
And so when we went to extrude all those building footprints for the entire 50 square mile area, we ran into some problems with file size, as you might guess. And so we've concluded that using Rhino, maintaining the detailed resolution and including all the elements across the entire study area isn't exactly accessible. And so what we want to do is, using site-wide graphics, we can use like an alternate approach, but this method is really good for creating detailed models at specific site areas along the river that are kind of identified using the community and the rewilding and the conservation layers. And so one example of this is a site at the base of Sentinel Peak near the Santa Cruz, which is a potential site because of its connection to the Tucson mountains.
So this is one of the graphics that we created, and this would help the community to visualize where all of the design changes and choices that the team makes would go on. There's also some context of the roads to familiarize people, to give them more context as well.
And then this is another example of the graphics that can be created because the model, we can easily derive sections from it that allow people to understand the quality, like the elevation quality of the river in relationship to the paths and like some existing vegetation, the low points where, you know, the vegetation is most dense. And the Sentinel Peak site is around in this area, so.
Oh yeah, and also here is the QR code again that Garrett was talking about. If you didn't get a chance to scan it, we have English and Spanish, and we would appreciate it if you could fill it out.
Okay,
Thank you.
that's all.
Excellent job. Have you all given to a large audience conference presentation before?
No.
Congratulations, they did great. That's a big deal. Nice job. Yeah, that sort of scale of collective data, that's a lot. It's a lot, and that finding is so common. Not predictable, but common. So good job handling that. Questions for folks? Yeah, Mike, please.
What's the resolution for your digital elevation model?
The resolution of like the files?
No, like meters per pixel.
That, I think we were using one. On USGS, you can kind of filter by the resolution that you want, and so we were going for the finest resolution. Yeah.
Great. Further okay. We got a QQ.
There's quite a few questions from online. So the first question is if you could go back to the last slide with the QR codes. So people have an opportunity to scan it, look at it a little longer. Okay. So our first question is from Ernest. Did you consider using the USGS LAS files in addition to using the DEM?
So we tried a lot of different things in the beginning of the project, and we found that the Grasshopper plugin was most accessible to us and gave us the best resolution. And using the Grasshopper Bison plugin, that was asking for DEM files. And so that's why we chose to go that route.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Beryl. Can they do a model of the connection between the two Tucson MTS and the west branch of the SC conservation area?
Yes, it can definitely be done because those tiles are just, they're a click of a button away. And then, yeah, we're looking at making the model like available. Of course, we can't make the entire model available because the file size is too large, but for specific sites that may be like modeled in the future of the project, those can certainly be made publicly available.
All right, well, thank you. That seems to be all the questions from the online viewers.
All right, we still have a moment for anybody in the room. So tell me if this is a fair interpretation. You all developed a model or a method that can be replicated where people are asking about specific locations within the river corridor, right? To do the whole thing would have taken a supercomputer, but what you all were able to do was focus on a hotspot that a lot of folks are familiar with to see what's possible. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and we're also hoping for this presentation to serve as a guide for anyone who wants to do it as well in any side that they want to choose to do it.
Sascha, Dennis, great job. Thank you both. Coming up on the stage now is Kevin Payne from Kimley-Horn. Kevin's going to be talking about a process-based restoration master plan for the effluent-dependent Santa Cruz River. Kevin, it's all yours.
Thank you, Luke. Like you said, my name is Kevin Payne. I'm a civil engineer and lead our surface water team for Kimley-Horn in our Tucson office. And my colleague Joe is going to be presenting with me.
Hi. Same. Joe Coffre.
So we're currently working with Sonoran Institute on the Santa Cruz River Restoration Master Plan. And the project limits are along the Santa Cruz River, including a couple key tributaries, Potrero Creek and Nogales Wash, along with Oso Wash. And the limits, as shown on the map here, go all the way from the international border up to Green Valley, which we're using Continental Road as kind of our northern boundary. So when we talk about stream restoration in the context of this project, we're really following the EPA's framework for a functional stream. And this pyramid comes right out of their guidelines. And a pyramid is a good representation because for a stream to have a good function, we need to start at the base and work our way up that pyramid. And the base here is hydrology. So when we talk about the Santa Cruz River within our project footprint, we have a very large watershed where the Santa Cruz River comes into the US across the international border. The watershed is 523 square miles. When we get to the northern limits of our project boundary in Green Valley, it has more than tripled in size to over 1,600 square miles. Some of the key impacts that go into hydrology and the stability of the watershed, obviously development and land use changes throughout the watershed. Climate changes definitely impact the watershed. And something that is unique to the Santa Cruz River in multiple spots, but especially within our project, is effluent from treatment plants. We have treatment plants in Mexico discharging into the Oso Wash and providing effluent base flow. And then the Nogales International Wastewater Treatment Plant, which is right at the confluence of Potrero Creek and the Santa Cruz River, produces a significant amount of base flow that is, or effluent that is base flow for the river. And we also know that due to development impacts within Nogales, Arizona and Nogales, Sonora, the potential for an increase in effluent for that base flow is significant. So when we look at stream restoration and that ultimate goal of providing a riparian habitat and significant biodiversity and biological and ecological stability within that riparian and floodplain habitat, again, we need to start at the base. For our project, we're really focused on levels 2 and 3, the hydraulic and geomorphic function of the floodplain. All right, so first we need to understand the historic condition, and we did a lot of literature review here to understand what did the Santa Cruz River look like before the impacts of man. And based on that, we understand it was a very broad floodplain, multiple flow paths, very braided and meandering system. Again, a very wide floodplain. We have a few reference reaches that we call that look similar, or what we believe to look similar to what it did in historic conditions. And the first one here is in Tubac near Bridge Road. And you can see some very shallow flow, debris catching flow and spreading that flow out, and some historic flow paths that during the base flow may not have water in them, but as soon as we get even a fairly small flood, that water spreads out and can occupy these channels. The second reference reach within the project area is in Rio Rico, near where Peck Canyon comes into the Santa Cruz River. Again, very shallow flow, historic flow paths so that you can tell there was water in this very recently, and obviously a very lush riparian ecosystem. Now some of the areas that are in need of restoration. One common theme we see throughout the entire project reach is some areas with significant incision and a varying level of incision. That incision in most cases is caused by some level of encroachment into the floodplain. That may be from agriculture. We have the railroad along the east side of the river that largely encroaches into the floodplain, and different types of development as well. What we see also with that encroachment is generally a straightening of the river, which causes the flow path to shorten and the grade along the river to ultimately steepen. This location here is in Amado, near where the Diablo Wash can come in. You can see that's actually me in the photo there in the red shirt, and those banks are well above the height of my head and very vertical. So a pretty unstable condition there. Here's another situation where we have some incision. This is at the Guy Tobin trailhead in Rio Rico. But what's different here is the system, although in size, is actually fairly stable here. And again, some reference for people on our team. You can see the banks are generally head height or higher, so some significant incision, but they're not near as vertical. They've got vegetation on them. And obviously in this case, we have some base flow that is helping that riparian vegetation. So different levels of incision and different levels of stability related to that incision. Now some different restoration concepts, and we've got 7 or 8 that we're presenting within this master plan, but I'm just going to cover a couple here for just based on time that we have. So this first one here, what we're calling concept A1 and A2, they represent kind of the lightest touch that we could come in to the floodplain and do some restoration. The dashed line down here at the bottom represents what existing conditions looks like. So some slight incision to where the main flow path is, but a fairly healthy overall floodplain. On the left, we have a remnant flow path or an old channel that could be activated during larger floods, and plenty of riparian vegetation. So what we would do here is, again, some light touches, placement of rocks, boulders anchored into the system, what we call beaver analogs that kind of try to mimic what a beaver would do in the natural ecosystem, to try to slow the water down, result in some deposition to bring that incision back up. We would do these in places where there's some stability already. That way we don't have significant hydraulic forces and stresses on these areas that we would try to restore, but also to try to even further slow down that water, allow it to spread across the floodplain. Here's one example of an area north of Clark Crossing Road. We do have some incision here. We also, in the blue line, you can tell the main channel is very straight. But if we look in the aerial image, you can really see some of the meandering historic flow paths based on that vegetation. So this tells us there's some health here. You can also see some development on the west bank that's causing some of that encroachment. So providing some minimal structure into the main flow path to help it meander, to help it break out during smaller storms and reactivate those historic flow paths that are meandering and curving would help stabilize this stretch. It would also help get water to that riparian vegetation that may be somewhat disconnected from the base flow currently. All right, concept B is kind of the very opposite end of the spectrum. This is one of the most significant restoration concepts that we could do. And again, the dashed line represents existing conditions. So on the left, you can see The bank is very high, and this likely represents some type of encroachment, potentially an old agricultural field that's no longer being farmed. And then on the right, we can see the channel is very incised below that bank there on the left. So in this case, we would work to remove a lot of that encroachment, relocate the main channel, and actually work on helping it meander through a wider floodplain. In the middle, create one or multiple braided smaller channels that could be activated during flood flow, and then work on filling in that incised primary channel. Obviously, this would be a lot of earthwork, a lot of structure placement within the floodplain, and a lot of revegetation throughout the process. Here's an example where this could be used next to the Agua Linda interchange. You can see there on the left, that's an old agricultural area that's no longer being farmed. But when they farmed it, they built it up to protect it from floods, and they then really encroached. The river's very straight. It's pushed over against the railroad, and that floodplain is very narrow versus what it wants to be, a very wide floodplain. So this is an example of an area that could utilize some very heavy restoration. All right.
Thank you, Kevin. So we can only do the analysis, right? And we can understand what we see in the field and us as experts, but we really wanted to make this a project that was driven by stakeholder involvement, local nonprofits, elected officials throughout the area, and of course, Sonoran Institute and partnering agencies here. So we brought together the project advisory group to really understand what's happening on the site day to day. We did include some landowners in that. So what are they experiencing on their property? And how can we further develop these alternatives based on their input? So to date, so far, we have included a project advisory group meeting back in December. And really, that was more of a gathering session of what are you experiencing on site as we looked at those existing conditions. So we put out a Mentimeter survey during the advisory group, and some keywords popped up, including flowing, restored, functional, and this really helped understand where do you want to get to in the future? What are your goals and what are our goals as a subsequent related to that? And so we followed up in February with that advisory group committee again and did some more brainstorming sessions. What elements should be included in these alternatives? So Kevin presented the alternative designs, but really this second advisory group was, how do you want us to get there and what are you looking for? So getting more into the ranking of the priorities and the feedback on the types of projects that could be implemented throughout. So resulting from that survey, asking about the existing conditions, a lot of people said that the existing river was moderate or not good overall. So we knew that there was going to be some restoration element that came from this project. The water quality aspect, there were concerns of E. coli and PFAS because of the source that Kevin mentioned coming from those treatment plants and just the history of the area. So then asking what those restoration priorities were, groundwater recharge and the availability of it. So then as we dove into what those priorities could look like, there wasn't a really strong consensus in the survey or in those follow-up discussions of should this be incremental, large scale, small scale, and really that's where we settled on kind of that hybrid approach of looking at the nature-based solutions as well as potential earthwork, moving, or those more structural looking facets. And so that's where those tiered rankings, the 1A and the 1B and the B and all the concepts that Kevin was mentioning really came into play. If you're familiar with that stretch, you know that the De Anza Trail is located throughout sections of that area. So we really wanted to focus on the connection of the human and equestrian element to the river to highlight the historical nature of that stretch. what we found is that the existing number of trailheads and the access points onto the trails is sufficient, but then enhancing those trail opportunities. So having more braids, if you will, to get down into the river or offshoot areas. So kind of those side trails, if you will. And then as we dove into the project priorities, surface water quantity, the groundwater recharge were the highest for those projects as well. So where we are at in the project is about, right now we're wrapping up the draft master plan report, which will then be presented to Sonoran Institute and the project advisory group again. And that's where we will really start to flesh out those ideas more fully. And then looking at the master plan final in the June timeframe. So we have included one QR code, which is to English and Spanish. So if you scan that, there is a toggle at the top right for the Spanish survey as well. But it's really if you want to provide any comments or stay up to date as we develop that draft plan, we can put it out to you and have you comment on that. It's simple, provide your email address and we'll add you to that mailing list.
For the stretch of the Santa Cruz you're looking at in your study, is that how does the depth of groundwater compare to, for example, the channel here in Tucson, which is fairly deep? I saw a lot of interest in groundwater recharge among the people that are participating, but how realistic is that for this particular project?
Yeah, great question. We did a fair amount of research into the groundwater aspects, including looking at some existing hydrogeological studies. And from what we can tell, the groundwater and the surface water are highly connected through that stretch. Whereas as we get further north into the watershed, there's a large disconnect between surface water and groundwater. So the base flow within our stretch of the river tends to extend to about 2 back, maybe a little north of 2 back. And that's also where then we see the groundwater starts to fall off. So we see a lot of connectivity between surface water and groundwater.
Okay, so we have a question from Kimberly. Are the landowners of those parcels wanting to invest in the land restoration projects? Curious to know who's directing this work.
Another good question. Like Joe said, we have an advisory group and stakeholder group that includes landowners. We have some very invested landowners in the project. There are a lot of parcels along this stretch of the river, but actually it's a lot of the same landowners. So we do have a good group of landowners. And then for the second half of that, Sonoran Institute is the one that we're working for. They're our client, and the project is funded through a grant from WIFA.
So something you said at the very beginning of your talk, Kevin, right? It sounds like you guys are really working hard on the engineering. You did mention something about I think you said there's 2 water treatment plants on the Mexican side, did you say? And they're discharging their effluent into the river, right? So I guess my question is there a lot of difference in the quality of the effluent coming from those treatment plants as opposed to what is being contributed on this side of the border, and how does that affect? And I thought of this because Luke gave a talk recently where he said there was something wrong with the ammonia content in the beginning, and that like 7 huge cottonwood trees like immediately keeled over and died. So I remember that part.
Yeah, great question. There are 2 very small treatment plants in Sonora that discharge directly into the Oso Wash. And it's very poor quality effluent that's coming out, almost untreated. And then the international treatment plant that is at the confluence of Potrero Creek and the Santa Cruz River has had upgrades done about a century or a decade ago. That the effluent quality it's generally very good there, but there are times when it gets overrun. And then there are some overflows of sewage into generally Nogales Wash. Long story there, but yeah, generally the larger treatment plant in Nogales, Arizona, or more of Rio Rico produces pretty high quality effluent.
And we'll have conversations tomorrow at 10:45 all about OSO Wash, so we can learn a lot more about that then. But for now, Joe, Kevin, thank you so much. Great presentation. So as a continuation of some of the work happening in the Nogales reach of the Santa Cruz River, I'm going to introduce Nick Carlson from AECOM, who will be speaking to the economic benefit evaluation of Santa Cruz River restoration. Oh, shoot, both of you guys? Okay, and Jason as well. Sorry, guys.
Okay, fantastic. Good afternoon. Great pleasure to be able to speak to you a little bit about the economic analysis approach and valuation that we will be doing, talking about, giving you a sense really of the framework and some of the methods that we're using. Jason's going to be following on with that after me. As you've been understanding, this is a project that's ongoing. We're still working with the alternatives. So these are some sort of draft framework and information that we have so far. First off, we're going to give you a quick overview of some of the key aspects and components of economic valuation. The purpose here really is to quantify and monetize project benefits to really help with decision-making and stakeholders understand kind of the more comprehensive valuation and benefits of the project. A key component of that is always really being aware of the no project and the project conditions and looking at the net change. So again, that's where it's really kind of key to be able to look at that net process with kind of the monetary economic process of getting all dollar values into the same dollar year, looking at future values, bringing them into a common point in time so that you can really recognize the time value of money. Those really then allow you to do kind of an apples to apples comparison with the purpose of being able to then look at different alternatives and get a sense of how they perform economically. There are basically 5 different common types of valuation approaches. Market approaches, this is really looking at transactions between customers, is probably the most direct, readily available, and a very good concrete example, but is kind of narrow in its focus. Benefit transfer is really a discussion of looking at other projects, looking to find where the commonality is, comparability, and being able to apply what has been determined for them and convert it so it's applicable for the specific project that you have at hand. The alternative and avoided cost is kind of a key way of looking like, if not for this project, what would it take? What are the next best alternatives for getting the same sort of resource outcomes? This is again can be often when you have those right examples can provide pretty good, understandable guidelines of what the cost might be. And finally, we have preference studies, both revealed and observed preference. With an observed preference, you're really tracking how stakeholders behave to get a sense of what they're investing in their choices with using the research. And then with the observed, sorry, that was the revealed. The observed is when you survey people. This is often called contingent valuation, willingness to pay studies. So looking at the specific approaches that we've been working on for the management alternatives, we have 4 real major categories where benefits are being estimated. We have several others that are going to be more qualitatively assessed. And we went through an initial process to try and be as comprehensive and then selecting this down based both on the methodologies and the data that is available and we can anticipate will be available on the alternatives. And I'll now kind of briefly go through the estimated approaches. Starting off with ecosystem enhancement. This is fundamentally a major purpose of the project. We've been hearing a lot about the work in understanding how the resources might be expected to improve over time. From our perspective as economists, we really see that there's an important helpful distinction to look at, the increased river flows. Those in and of themselves can be expected to result in resource effects. And then kind of on top or in lieu of that is the work that Kimley-Horn is going to be doing, looking to see what are specific restoration alternatives and approaches that can be used to accentuate and even further improve the ecosystem. So we see this as being kind of a quality impact, primarily that's going to be related to the existing resources, expecting to see that increased water availability can help increase vegetation habitat density, allow perhaps some greater diversity. That will also be expressed wildlife populations that are present and a greater abundance. And then secondly, you have kind of a potential quantity impacts. Looking at the increased flows to the extent that the river can run longer, to the extent that it runs a little bit wider, we may see naturally both from just the water quality or from the specific alternatives that Kimley-Horn is looking at, changes in the quantity of the ecosystems, changing and adding ecosystem areas that maybe are at a higher classification and kind of represent a net new land coverage. And to the extent that we can identify net new acreages, there's where the valuation is more readily can be achieved. So talking about this again, kind of really, the EA is focusing primarily for the ecosystems on the wildlife and habitat benefits. The standard literature really has been using ecosystem enhancement and ecosystem services as kind of a more broad catch-all expression, often also rolling in property effects and recreation effects, which we've, are looking at separately and have been trying to disaggregate from those two to recognize them separately. There's also climate and carbon benefits as well as some other concepts. There are numerous tools and databases that we're working with from which to try and identify projects that we can apply this benefit transfer methodology with. Some of the most important ones we'll look at briefly in the next slide include the FEMA, which has its unit values, and then a couple of sources of databases. Another opportunity that we're working with, but is proving to be kind of difficult, is looking at the avoided costs. There is some potential when we're seeing increases in addition in restoration areas that we can look at what has been spent for similar restoration or preservation projects. And by noticing what has been spent there on a per acre basis for comparable properties, I think provides a good guidance of what the value is that we're seeing elsewhere within the watershed or in other comparable areas in Arizona or in the West. So we're really hoping to try and find some good examples of that and provide that as some useful context. And then finally, there's the willingness to pay. And there are some well-established old studies for river areas. It is sometimes difficult to make sure that they really apply, and they tend to be kind of old. Here's a brief overview of what we have so far with some of the tools. As I mentioned, the FEMA, they have a recognized forest value of about $2,800 annually per year, per acre for forested areas. They have a relatively limited number of classifications, but that certainly covers some of the riparian areas that we have in the Santa Cruz. Earth Economics has done some study for the general Colorado River Basin across the multiple states area. And for herbaceous, which is another of the land covers that's applicable, they have similarly about a $2,700 per acre valuation that they've been able to determine. I think another tool on here that we're interested to see to what extent it can be used successfully is the iTree, which really provides a kind of individual tree specific valuation. So to the extent that we can match up, this is for cottonwoods that's here. It's primarily based on its carbon capture value, but they have a representation of nearly $50 per tree per year that could be useful. And again, like I mentioned before, the key thing being is we recognize perhaps shrubland that's increasing, so we have to net out what the value is below that. So finishing up on the ecosystems, there's quite a great variety in the range of costs that can be attributed to the different land types. As we're working through an evaluation, we anticipate that we may be working towards more mid-level ranges to kind of recognize perhaps the slightly more more arid conditions than standard forest areas and the lower productivity. But again, the thing here will be looking at the change from the existing land to the extent that we are able to restore and move it up into a higher classification. Another big component is the recreation use that we're looking at separately. Increased water flows and changes from the ecosystems can be expected to increase the recreation quality for the existing trails and recreation resources. The aesthetic qualities can be more attractive. And then separately, you could have extension of the river, being able to, as it goes longer, basically add riparian recreation opportunities. I think most of those are in private land, so they may not be something that can necessarily be developed. But also, you know, some of the alternatives may look at adding additional trails. And to that extent that we add recreation opportunities, you can have greater use and give an economic valuation to that. As we mentioned, you know, when we're talking about existing recreational resources, higher quality recreation resources will be difficult to necessarily recognize how much that can mean to folks who are currently using it. There may be a certain extent that we're seeing that the project will bring recreation from elsewhere. And if it's existing trips, that probably isn't good. That won't be a net benefit to the community as a whole. But it would be induced new recreation that's brought by new facilities or that better quality that really will represent a kind of a economic gain for recreation. There's benefit transfer studies from a couple of studies, including Weber, which was done specifically for the watershed that we're looking at that can be helpful for this. There are also various unit values that have been collected by the Forest Service on the Oregon State University website from which we can identify ones that are applicable. And finally, USDOT also recognizes that for induced new trips, that there's about an $8 per trip health benefit that is recognized by the federal government. So to the extent that we have scenarios where we're seeing 10,000 new recreation trips per year, we would apply those unit values. And Jason's now going to talk a little bit about property values and groundwater.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to cover the last two areas that we had on the list there that we're evaluating monetarily. One of them is the property values. And there's been a lot of pretty well established in literature that increases. Okay. It's pretty well established in literature that increases in parks and recreation opportunities leads to an increase in property values for adjacent properties. It's not just the properties bordering the recreational area, but it decreases a little bit as it backs up further away. But so that's one of the things we're going to be trying to capture here in this one. So the impacts on the resource for the have been discussed already. We have the ecosystem enhancements as they were talking about. So you got a nicer area behind you. You have visual and quality of life, and you also have the recreational use experience that Nick just mentioned, and that includes both more people coming to recreate there and a better recreational experience. So the benefits of the resources are property values for property value increases for homes, and we're just using an area of 1.1 miles from the river right now. So, but how we measure that is it's really a benefit transfer study, and you can get in really detail on these in a DONIC study, but we're going to use a more simple approach for this one, but look at prior to real estate effects, and studies have shown that you get between a 3 and a 6% increase in, 3 and a 6% increase in the property values from these recreational things. And it would be applicable to a more limited area. And it's also lead to an annual increase in property tax revenue for the community. This one, we're getting short on time, so I'll be pretty quick here, but has been some talk about increases in groundwater recharge from surface water. This has yet been defined, but we did find an old study that did have an estimate of 11,000 acre feet per year, which equates to about 15 million gallons per day. That's new water supply for this area and has a number of benefits. It improved water availability for the Santa Cruz and any kind of resulting development that may occur for other uses. Potential for, it's also a reliable source. It's going to be coming on a regular basis even during the drought. And you guys would have local control over this water source. It's not something you had to ship in from someplace else. There is a number of ways that we were taking a look at this, and one of them is agricultural fallowing for agricultural lands. A lot of pecans and everything are heavy irrigation. If you had to drop those, you could use the water for something else. You also have building desalinization plants, and also there's other ways we're looking at it, such as the Central Arizona project, getting water from there, then piping it in over. So we'll be looking at all these different valuation techniques. Just as a quick summary, there's a lot of different things that we're taking a look at and have taken a look at from the to try to monetize that. It's still a work in progress. We're working to help take a look at the master plan and work with them to make sure we're consistent. And there's a lot of different beneficiaries, from water users to society to recreational users to property owners. So with that, I will turn it over to questions.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. You didn't have a chance to talk much about how you're looking at flood risk, but I just want to give you that opportunity. We're living in a time when the flood risks are increasing, and there's a whole different kind of viewpoint. Once you've had a big flood, things look different. Things look different. People will value things differently. There'll be a lot of damage to soils and from erosion, overbank erosion, and damage to property and that sort of thing. So how will you look at the potential avoided costs here due to different interventions, which might include, soil retention on properties that have agricultural value, for instance?
So, I mean, fundamentally, when we first addressed this issue, the quantity of water that's coming from the daily effluent flows is really very, very minor compared to the flood events. So it really has a negligible increase in flood risk that's coming from those base flows. So we're really talking about the stormwater and the flood risk that's associated with how the watershed functions in general. And to the extent that Kimley-Horn, in their work, will be looking at different restoration alternatives, can expect that those may have maybe primarily positive, maybe some sort of negative, recognizing what those flood effects might be. But from an extent of being able to quantify what that would mean, I mean, a flood damage study is, a very major and separate process. Forthcoming, at least qualitatively, understanding if, being able to increase the vegetation quantity will be able to retain more water, will it be able to function and being able to pull water and collect and hold during the storm events. Maybe there are some increases in infiltration rates so that there's a better ability for the river to correspond and respond in these events. But those are the things we're really looking forward to from Kimley-Horn, is them to inform us what would be the net overall resource effect, and might we expect there to be property damage differences.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, and I appreciate always quantifying the landscapes monetarily. I guess my question is looking at this through an environmental justice lens, right? What's stopping us from looking at landscapes or specific areas and realizing there's more value in restoring or investing money in one area versus another when a population in one area has historically been oppressed, or as a community of people of color, right? So how do we balance understanding that investing the money maybe in a more affluent area is gonna increase the quality of life for a lot of people, but it's not targeting people who are not necessarily historically been a part of conversations to habitat restoration in their communities, so to speak.
I mean, I think traditionally, that's often where recreation is looked at as being the mechanism by being able to give residents and local folks an experience and an activity and a connection with those river areas. So that would certainly be one way where we would look in a more detailed study at what the catchment area and who might be the folks that are going to be recreating. We might also be able to look at what their other opportunities are. And you're absolutely right. Low-income populations are not as able to drive 15, 20 minutes away to go to another sort of trail opportunity. So that certainly should be part of the consideration when you're trying to look at those equity issues. I agree.
First up here, we have first time here, Caylyn Rich from the University of Arizona will be presenting on paving the way for participatory planning through pláticas, on water insecurity. I'm going to plug you in here.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Perfect. All right, thanks so much for having me. My name is Caylyn Rich, and like Luke said, I'm a first-year PhD student with the University of Arizona in the School of Anthropology, and the collaborators on this project include my advisor, Dr. Megan Carney, who's here, and PhD candidate, Dayanira Ibarra. All right, great. So yes, today I'm going to be talking about how we used this approach of pláticas to learn how households and communities in Southern Arizona experience water insecurity. Oh. Okay. Yeah, so really briefly, I'm just going to go over conditions of water insecurity as they occur in Southern Arizona, and then talk about how pláticas represent both a methodology and a method. Within looking at pláticas as a method, I'll talk about how we prepared for pláticas and then how we conducted them, and then the sort of reflections that we had and how this process went. So just to iterate, this is really more of a how-to kind of methodology talk rather than the findings that we learned. These are kind of being sorted through now, and this talk focuses a lot more on the process and reflections that we had in actually conducting pláticas. And then I'll conclude with some next steps and directions that we're headed. So on the left side of the screen is a screenshot from the Arizona Water for All Network, which sponsored this project. It's a statewide collaborative that's really trying to understand water insecurity as it's occurring. And they describe water insecurity as the lack of access to safe, reliable, and affordable water for daily needs, such as drinking, cooking, cleaning, and bathing. So that's a pretty cohesive understanding of water insecurity, but despite common perceptions, water insecurity really persists in high-income countries, including the US. And the reason this is important is because usually it's the marginalized, underserved communities that are facing the brunt of water insecurity. And this is also how it unfolds in Southern Arizona, where our work took place. As you're all probably very familiar with Arizona, these three counties at the southern part of the state, Pima, Cochise, and Santa Cruz, is where we actually conducted our pláticas. I also just want to note that throughout this talk, I'm going to use the terms community member, participant, and collaborator interchangeably, so you don't get confused. So we also have kind of been hearing a lot today about some of these technical manifestations of water in the Santa Cruz area. But looking at the Southern Arizona kind of collectively as a region, it's important to think about how conditions of poverty and poor health are exacerbated, and they usually translate to amplified conditions of water insecurity in a region that's really highly securitized and facing high surveillance practices. Also, more than a third of this population in Southern Arizona identifies as Hispanic or Latino. And of course, this area, as it stands in the Sonoran Desert, is characterized by extremely hot summers, high rates of evapotranspiration, prolonged periods of drought. And so all of these kind of factors are culminating in higher rates of water insecurity. Okay, so hopefully this isn't too foreign, but when we think about pláticas as a methodology, we have to look to where they stem from, which is from Chicana Latina feminist epistemologies. What that might mean is that pláticas are something that's co-constructed. They understand that knowledge is already occurring, and when people engage in shared conversation, they're kind of eliciting some of that insight. Pláticas at their core are these forms of informal conversation. But in presenting extensions of particular ways of knowing, pláticas can contribute to kind of disrupting these traditional hierarchies in research, where researchers come in and kind of apply a top-down approach as far as this is what the work will be and this is how we should understand it. So it's a really useful way to think about community-based research. To that end, it also interrupts the sort of researcher subject orientation when doing research. So it was really important when we were getting ready to do this project that we didn't perpetuate mistrust that happens quite often when researchers go out to a site and say, I want to extract some information from you. And it was during these initial conversations as the project was starting up that community partners in the region who Dr. Carney had rapport with actually proposed this idea of pláticas. So it was a practice that was already in place in Southern Arizona, and they recommended that we use it. So it came from community partners, not researchers. And that's a really key point to underscore. Okay, so looking at pláticas as a method, I'll talk about how we actually prepared for the pláticas and then go into how we convened them. So this was a form of data collection, of course. So we assembled a discussion template that consisted of about 6 research questions relating to questions that people had in relationship to land, community, and then of course questions about water access and use, and kind of open-ended responses for people to share about coping strategies relating to water challenges they might be experiencing. These discussion templates were in English and Spanish, and we then went ahead with outreach. So we had to actually get plática groups together. So this involved reaching out to organizations and community partners that we had previous rapport with via phone, email, in-person visits. And so when we would reach out, we would explain what the project was and then specify the ask. So making sure that folks knew why we were there, what would be involved. The conversation, the plática, would take about an hour, what participants could join, and then really the ultimate goal that this would inform future collaboration and future participatory decision-making. So we didn't just want to enter these communities and leave, but we wanted them to be involved in looking at future directions for how to work towards more water secure futures. So a key part of this, as should be done with most community-based research, is making sure that values are identified at the beginning of the research process. So making sure that it was also going to be useful to the organizations that we partnered with, that the insights that we would get from households about water experiences, about experiences with water insecurity would be useful in helping these community facilitators kind of outline next steps they might want to pursue. So also kind of related to that, we needed to identify somebody within the organization who would be a community facilitator. And they were the ones that would actually be leading the conversation around these pláticas rather than the research team. I'll get to why this is important in a minute. But then we went ahead with scheduling a space which was usually at or near the organization site itself. It needed to accommodate our group and be easily accessible. And then the community facilitator was the one who would share the information details about the event so that members, community members, could come and join the plática. Okay, these are some pictures from we couldn't take pictures of folks, of course, but these are some pictures from the sites that we were at. So when it came time to actually convene the pláticas, Usually 1 or 2 research team members would carpool to the site. We would bring snacks for sharing. And then when we were there, we would sit in a circle or in small groups of circles. And we would introduce ourselves, say that we were with the university, but emphasize that it was the community facilitator that folks already knew who would be leading the discussion. We also requested permission to audio record and take field notes. And I should mention that the community facilitators also took notes for their own benefit, and we requested to include their notes in our analyses. So they're being coded for together. As I mentioned, the conversation itself took about an hour to an hour and a half. And then at the end, participants were provided a $20 cash stipend. And the community facilitators who were doing a lot of the upfront legwork and kind of helping us prepare for these pláticas, and then are involved kind of ongoing, also received an honorarium for their participation. Oops. Okay. So one thing I wanted to mention with the community facilitators is that it was really important that ahead of time we kind of discussed what we were hoping to get out of the plática, but make sure that the community facilitator felt comfortable leading the discussion so that they could stray from the questions that we had if they needed to, but they also felt confident in kind of leading the questions and knowing the purpose for these conversations. And another key piece is that we're not water experts, right? We're anthropologists. And so sometimes community members would ask questions that we didn't know the answers to ourselves. But because a plática involves researchers being engaged as well and not kind of siloed off from the conversation, we were able to express our own uncertainty over questions that we didn't have answers to, like measuring household water insecurity at the individual level versus at the municipal level. Okay, so this is the fun part. In total, we conducted 9 pláticas with 6 different partner organizations. 3/4 of participants were women, and most of these pláticas were held in a combination of English and Spanish. Here we go. And many of the participants spoke Spanish and had migrated or continued to maintain familial ties to Mexico. Most participants were also in their 30s to 40s. And because the partner organizations that we collaborated with were serving primarily low-income households, this also kind of factored into conversations that we were having as regards people wanting to contribute to their experiences coping with water insecurity. So while there was significant enthusiasm across a lot of the partner organizations to engage in this project, not everybody we approached had the capacity to hold a plática. They might have already been stretched really thin, providing the services that they were to their community. And so it was really important that when we were able to get partners on board and they had the capacity to help put these pláticas together, we scheduled them after events that were already occurring. And this kind of builds on the foundational understanding of pláticas, which is that people are already gathering to share information. And so we were just kind of piggybacking onto that by scheduling these pláticas after an already occurring event. Like I mentioned too, it was really important that the community facilitators felt prepared to lead the discussion. In instances when there was more direction needed from the research team, you could tell that there was also greater hesitation from the participants to share. They were a little bit more reserved compared to when the community facilitator was really kind of steering the conversation. To that end, collaborators also asked questions of each other, which is kind of another way that we knew that these pláticas were really happening in action, because that insight was already being expressed and kind of invoked by different collaborators. And to this end, there was a lot of different forms of engagement and response. So sometimes people would murmur in response, or they would shake their heads yes or no, or people might jump in at the same time and give the same response. And so this led to the community facilitator or a research team member maybe needing to ask for like a show of hands to make sure we captured an accurate number of responses. But this really kind of was in line with what pláticas should be, which are informal conversations, not being restricted to certain forms of engagement. And then also kind of seeing how this knowledge production was activated. We got to see how community members shared creative coping strategies, like finding the right time of the day to go to the water station to resupply water gallon jugs, or sharing joint exasperation over increasing water utility bills. Those, of course, are a little bit more in the findings, but these are just some of the ways that this insight started to come up as regards households and communities responding to water insecurity. And then finally, it was really important that that these conversations could be held in the language desired by participants. So I mentioned most of these were in Spanish or English, and we had one plática that was in Farsi and English. And I will say that this plática we probably struggled with the most because it both put an extra burden on the community facilitators to translate, and it kind of removed the research team from being able to really engage in the conversation too. Okay, so next steps. We are collating all of the information across all the pláticas, and we'll be disseminating this to the different groups. And in those sessions, kind of identifying and brainstorming ways to maintain and continue this participatory decision-making so that these plática groups can help decide what the priorities are and what Arizona Water for All, which is that network that supported this project, can do. For example, some things that were of interest were water quality testing kits, water education workshops, and so figuring out ways to bring this back to the plática community so that it's actually of use to them. So just to conclude here, I think it's really important that we take the time, especially in spaces like this, to talk about the importance of a methodology that's really grounded in community-based research, because it offers a co-constructed approach to both collating vital information about how households and communities respond to water insecurity and share about their lived experiences, but also because it paves the way for trust between academic policy and community discourse around what the priorities for those most affected by water insecurity are, so that we can move towards more water secure futures. Thanks.
Caylyn, thank you. That was excellent. And a new theme here for Research Day. So thank you for being a part of it.
I guess I have a question. How applicable might this be as a mechanism to the non-Hispanic populations or folks? I mean,
Yeah, well, I didn't get into it too much, but pláticas, as they're kind of applied, has been more active in like higher education spaces or early learning, so a lot more in education spaces. But I gave a very similar talk at the Society for Applied Anthropology a month ago, and that was a little bit more like environmental researcher space, and there was a lot of scope for being able to apply pláticas in those spaces. I think just the one caution that the anthropologist in me would, of course, promote is that we kind of owe homage to the, where this comes from, which is, of course, rooted in a Chicana Latina epistemology. But I think there's a great scope for expanding this to non-Hispanic communities, and it's already being done. So, yeah.
How did you identify target audiences or groups, and how did you identify the community connectors?
Yes. Okay. So some of that did stem from Dr. Carney's rapport with pre-existing rapport with communities. We worked with a couple of community health clinics that were in Santa Cruz, and then also a lot of like snowball sampling, right? So sometimes this outreach, we got in touch with somebody who was interested, and they said, well, this other group is also interested. Let me get you in touch with them. Especially for Pima County, that was a little bit easier to do because there, it was easier to kind of jump between different groups. But for the more rural settings, it was a little bit harder. And like I said, not everybody we reached out to was able to do this, and they had to decline even if they were interested. So yeah, did I answer your question?
Is Pláticas going to continue on? Because you're extremely needed.
That's a great question. Well, maybe I'll defer to Okay, never mind. I can answer this. So this was sort of one phase of some of these projects being done in Southern Arizona, and the pláticas as they were here are not like currently continuing, but we are continuing to work with these plática groups and have some of these follow-up sessions. And my hope is that if funding were to continue for efforts like this, then yeah, we could expand this and continue to have these conversations. Maybe not even just for resource insecurities around water, but food insecurity too, for example.
Beautiful work. Great, excellent. Thank you so very much. Next up, we have another double header. We have Melissa Melly Bowman and Mabel Rivera from Pima County Environmental Education. They'll be talking about connections to inspire Santa Cruz River protection. Come on up. Two mics, one mic. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Hi. Hello. Thank you for being here. I want to make an introduction to my lovely coworker over there. This is Mabel Rivera. Hello. And I'm Melissa Melly, and we are here on behalf of Pima County Conservation Lands and Resources. We are connected to our keynote speaker, Dr. Kris Gade. And we are, as she referenced, a newer set of stewards for lands here in the Sonoran Desert. But Mabel and I are going to speak on behalf of environmental education, as we have inspired and hope to continue to inspire connections of Santa Cruz River protection. And we wrote in our abstract when we were submitting this, to protect the river, perhaps first we can get to know the river and appreciate it. And this is something that's foundational to what Mabel and I and our team does when we do environmental learning with the public, because we want to showcase what we've done. We want to show you and perhaps hear from you how you all and we all get to know the river and appreciate it. And then we want, Mabel will be sharing in-depth curriculum, but all in all, we want to inspire this next generation of thinkers, innovators, and leaders, and the people currently who still are part of the system, which is all of you. And we are also celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan. So if you missed that, please go back and reference the keynote talk that Dr. Kris Gade spoke of, which is essentially balancing the conservation and protection of our cultural heritage and our natural resources for our Sonoran Desert. But yes, I want to ask the audience really briefly, if you can raise your hand, if you have ever been, or if you have been, sorry, to a stretch of the Santa Cruz River within the last year, or this past year. Yay! Oh yeah, I can raise my hand too. Okay, next question. Have you been inspired to take any pictures on any stretch of the Santa Cruz River? Cool, I like that. It's not a right or wrong, but that's cool. And then my last question, raise your hand, please. If you've ever seen or experienced or witnessed something or someone, or maybe a belonging of people or things or animals or wildlife on the Santa Cruz River that you wanted to learn more about, could have been like a plant or some history. Is this anyone in the room? Cool, me too. Okay. So once again, I just want to re-reference that the ethos that Mabel and I bring is we want to get to know the river and we want to appreciate it with you all. This is our agenda for today. We're sort of spacing it out through time. First, we're talking about the relationships that we are building and have built. We're reflecting, we're looking back to our most recent past and seeing some of the highlights and blooms from our youth. Then we're going to be looking at some sprouts. This is what Mabel has been creating and co-creating in terms of programs and lessons. And then we're looking at our near future, the seeds that are being planted as we speak, a first look at a new children's book. So we're saving that for the very end. And now I'm going to pass this to Mabel.
Yeah, so we do a lot of different programming, but some of that programming happens right along the river or riparian habitats. I do a program called Aquatic Ecosystems. And then we also have the Living River of Words program that I know that Anna is here and she represents the part of our team that does that work. So both of these field trips and experiences are really about building relationship with the river and getting to know the river, experiencing curiosity, being inspired. And so one of the items that I highlighted here on the bottom is an image of me trying to do a new stewardship opportunity with the Watershed Management Group. They don't have as easy access to maybe teachers as I might already have the connections with. And so we collaborated. They have a multi-year program to remove Arundo. And so in this image at the bottom, you can see this group of young women. It was so awesome. They arrived and only girls signed up for this field trip. And they're like ready to get out there, and they were like removing Arundo. They wanted to stay out there for a few more hours. And I was so proud of them. It's like, yeah. But right here, they're looking at an area that has regrowth. And this is amazing. They're like, oh, I've never seen anything like this. This is so beautiful. They were trying to convince us why they didn't need to go back to school, but that was lovely. But I'm going to partner with them in the future for this next year to do a similar field trip. So this is about creating those experiences, about creating and inspiring relationships, because sometimes it's a thing that you drive by and don't look back at. But to really go back to these spaces that are being revived is inspirational just for me. But to bring these kids, they bring a wide new lens that I'm excited that they bring forward. And speaking of lenses, I'll pass it on.
Yeah. So just for reference before I move on, if you're curious more about the Living River Words, you can reference last year's talk that Anna gave. But what Mabel and Anna and I continue to do and more of our team is really exciting. One thing that we did a lot more of this year was incorporating activities that involved photography. And so you might ask, why photography? Because not only did youth have those opportunities to do restoration projects with Mabel, we also wanted them to go down there and take pictures. As you may know, photography is an art form, and there's a lot of self-expression, a lot of personal expression. It is an art component, one of 3 for the Living River Awards, but we were able to add it to a very specific aquatic ecosystem program, and we hope to add it to some more in the upcoming year. But each photo that every youth takes tells a story. Especially with how we run the program for them. And we want those stories to be captured as evidence so that we can take a look at the ecosystem on that given day, on that given time, and we can reference it. And there's lots of details in those pictures when you put them together. Also, photography, as we know, forces us to slow and pause. We see this with youth as well. We really see that we want to be intentional about what we're taking pictures of and what we're looking at through those lenses when we're doing specifically photography. I put the word analog. I really like that word. And I know that cameras are not necessarily truly analog, but they are a digital form. It is more old school than a cell phone. So it's pretty funny to see youth not know how to operate a point and shoot camera. And they think it's cool now. And even those are some of the cameras we have, but we also elevate it with our DSLRs, which are the more professional high-tech cameras as well. And lastly, the river's always changing, whether it's in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. We want to pay attention to that. We want to see what those ebbs and flows looks like. So the youth are also paying closer attention to those changes with their photography. Are you all ready to see some photography? Okay, me too. I'm glad. So one of the schools that we did a field trip for with Living River of Words is Doolin. So what we're looking at is we're at Mission Garden, and we're seeing the acequia. Mission Garden Have you all been there? Okay, and if you haven't, please go. But if you have, this is what it looked like for some of the youth. At the base of a mountain or Sentinel Peak, they were looking at the landforms, the water, the plants, and a lot of the reflections from there. At Wakefield, we were at Crossroads. Has anyone here been to Crossroads up in Marana? That's another stretch of the Santa Cruz. Please go if you haven't gone there. It was a little bit of a different experience. We are still at the Santa Cruz River, but we're a little more north. And there's a lot of different plants that were popping up, different stretches. And this particular school group was a bigger school group. So I have a little more of some photos to show you with that. I meant to say, if the quadrants on the screen are giving you a hard time, please look off to the sides, because that's also giving you the image. And I was really impressed. I'm not sure if you can see, there's a tiny little dragonfly over there. Really impressed with how these students are capturing the movement of water, the plants around the water, the scenes of the water, and having a really good time doing it as well. So I am flipping through quite a few photos, but I really feel like all the photos show something a little bit different, and it feels like we're with them, honestly, when we're at the Santa Cruz. I like this one because it feels like we're right on top of the Santa Cruz as well. There's a few more Wakefield photos here. Some close-ups, macro photography. More plant life as well. And we have Drachman here. Drachman was at Mission Garden, so we're back at Mission Garden here. Some more blooms from Mission Garden because we were there at a different time as we were with Julian. And I am flipping through a little bit more quickly because we got the 5-minute time. We have one more school group after this to show. And it's the newer one, the San Miguel High School with Mabel. We had high school students this time back at Crossroads, and they were there right in the middle of a lot of blooms. So a lot of flowers were blooming at that time. And so it was a really colorful experience, and they were looking at different forms of wildlife and blooms and plants. And this is still along a stretch of the Santa Cruz River as well. I'm going to pass it now to Mabel.
Awesome. So yes, I've been working on a lot of curriculum related content. I do teacher workshops also, along with doing some work with schools specifically at their school or on school sites. But I've been finding just that we needed more of them building up some advocacy leans and some things related to like getting to know and building a relationship with the river if maybe they can't come on a field trip with me, or maybe to coexist. So this is a QR code that links you to more of these lessons. There's more than only ones about the Santa Cruz River, but these are working with high school and middle school students to work on different skill sets and looking at data from other organizations, because my work is really about trying to tie in the work that all of you are doing. It's important to me to highlight each other because we're really working together as a community to build these relationships. We're not an island, and I don't want to be. I want to be there with you all. And so we need to empower these kids, but they first need to know why this work matters. And last, I will point out that I am co-authoring, which I never thought I would ever say. So I'm co-authoring a book that is now at the final stages. This is called The Song of the Santa Cruz River, written by Torrin Anderson. I did the Spanish translation as well as I wrote the back matter, and I have partnered collaboratively with the Sonoran Institute, who helped look at these different iterations and help us ensure that the story we are telling, as well as the aquatic life, are accurate to these areas. And so we put a lot of work into this. Why we put a lot of work into it is because this book has been missing. right? We needed a book that would help build a kid's relationship. And hopefully through that child, we can open up the doors to adults that are reading them the story. They're like, oh, I haven't been going to the river. Let's go check it out. So in my back matter, I focus on the work that other people are doing, the story that has happened basically since this bigger rebirth, and the actions that took place to make sure the rebirth has happened, how they also can get involved in that work, where they can visit. And it has a link to a teacher resource page. And so on the last slide, it has my email. If you're a group that is working on creating teacher resources or wants to get the word out, please email me. I'm in charge of that website. So I can add whatever I want. But I want to make sure that I highlight more of that work, because can I and do I know about all of the work that everyone does? No. But this is a QR code. It will be out in the fall. And thank you.
Beautiful work, beautiful work. And please do make a point to pre-order that book. It is lovely and perfect in time for anybody under 30 in your family for Christmas.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing. I wanted to say, I think it's incredible that you guys are reaching out to the younger generations and fostering this relationship with the river that has been so important for the region. I am wondering if you guys plan to, 5-10 years from now, reach out to these groups of kids that you've been working with and just see how these events you've been having with them, how it's impacted their life. Has it, help them make decisions in terms of career or worldviews and stuff, because things like this in such developmental ages in these younger generations is truly going to make or break the future for them. So
thank you. I hope that we can find a way to do that. I do work with some teachers ongoing throughout several years, so I do get to get some more touch points, more so with educators and things that they've said. I do host interns, and one of them that just finished his is in the back, and I will plan to keep in touch with him because he has no choice. But but to me, it's like finding these different ways. I hope that I have that opportunity. I don't know that I have a good pathway to do that. So I'm always up for ideas, but I don't currently have a good pathway to do that.
Anybody else? Oh yeah, please. You're on.
I thank you, and I also see our children so blessed with you too, because you're so natural that you'll attract our children and echo what was said. It's so important to keep in touch with them because we need to impact them since they are born. No? Thank you.
Thank you.
And part of
Oh, I just want to say, if you want more time with the photos, some of them are going to be at the Living River Words exhibit that will be traveling throughout the year at different libraries. And I'm sorry that I went through them very quickly.
And in addition to that, there's all the curriculum, the Living River of Words curriculum or experience. Curriculum is almost too sterile for it. It's ongoing. It's very beautiful and very impactful. Poetry, watercolor, right? Drawing, photography, journaling. It's all in there. So if you are an educator or have an educator in your life in this community, please speak to anybody whose hand goes up right now who can tell you all about it. We're our Living River of Words folks. There we go. Great. Okay. Both of you, thank you so very much for an excellent presentation. Good put. All right, so we are going to wrap today with a new this is the way that we wrap research days now, is experiencing the art, experiencing the beauty of interpretation of this river. And to do that today, we are going to ask Melissa Melli to stay up on the stage and Senora Josefina to join us as well, where we will be exploring some Santa Cruz River poetry from Barrio Kroger Lane and Favor Celestial. So please, big round of applause for sure.
May I have someone brave or two people that want to hold the poetry that's been standing over there? And I have to actually grab said bag in just a moment as well.
Buenas tardes. Para servirle a usted y al creador, Josefina Cárdenas, and Señor Dr. Luke, I want to acknowledge you and thank you. How long has this person been crying like the Llorona of the river? Mis hijos, but I've been saying, living river of words, our youth, our children. So thank you very much for listening, being part of us. Gracias.
So once again, thank you. We're doing this as a collaboration of Pima County Conservation Lands and Resources, connected to the presentation we just did, and Favor Celestial. Favor Celestial is a community initiative focusing on economic development, cultural preservation, and environmental sustainability within the Barrio Kroger Lane. And there's a lot of appreciating and preserving that cultural heritage in that area. So I thank you and Ms. Shirley and all the members of Favor Celestial in the community for supporting this. I want to tell you all a story, and I will need your participation with it. But we're gonna start with first by acknowledging that the photo behind, or that you can see right now, is by Abelardo, your nieto, right? Yes. So that's Senora Josefina's grandson, and that is sort of one of the important pieces of our story is where are we? We're at the base of a mountain closer to the Santa Cruz River, but this is a beautiful photo to start with. I'm gonna take you back. You're all gonna join me on November 4th, 2025, when Pima County, this was for the Living River of Words, collaborated with Favor Celestial, and we all gathered here at this place called the Casa Ochoa, or Ochoa House. This is a space that has held many gatherings, many celebrations, and has held a lot of memories. It was a beautiful space to be at. It was a little cloudy that day, and we were mainly outside. We waited at the beginning for people of the neighborhood to come join us. You could hear the cars. We could feel a nice breeze. There's walls, there's chairs, there's seats. And let's pretend like we're walking around together, and we could see that the inside, the door's open. There's some space that we're gonna be returning to, and we did return to as a group later in the day. And we also have that adobe right there. It wasn't being used at the moment, but it stands right in front of the house. Really important touch point there. But here we are. We're at our table where we were setting it up. We had all our chairs. We were gathering for our meal together. So we were helping with plates and dishes, and we had something else going on in the background. We had these beautiful mesquite trees. Have you all felt a velvet mesquite before? How soft that feels? Yeah, that's what I was feeling when I was standing under that tree with those velvet mesquites. And those are surrounded by the table. But there was also something else going on. We had an asada. Carne asada. So if you can visualize either those smells and those sounds, I was really into the tortillas that we were warming over that's right, the asada. And it was really warm, and everyone was getting really excited because it was finally time to eat. And there was lots of different foods. Do you remember what other foods we had out there? I know we had fruit.
Yes, and Abelardo made his own recipes of lemonades and poured these different fresh fruits in them.
I remember there were some combinations of lemonades there. It was so good. So we were having a really good time. We're eating and just talking and getting to know each other. But by the time we finished eating, it was dark. And in fact, on November 4th, 2025, it was almost a full moon. And November is known as the beaver moon, but to the autumn, it's known as the yellow, orange, and brown moon. So the moon was starting to rise on the east. And when there's a moon coming up, sorry, I have to play some ambiance here because there's always creatures that start coming out at night too. What are some creatures that come out at night? Yeah, I got some crickets for you. And maybe if you listen really carefully, you might hear some owl maybe in the background. Maybe you hear the urban coyotes in the background. Was there anyone else that we could hear? We heard the cars.
Well, when you were walking all by, I said, watch out for the Llorona. It's her time too.
It was our cue. We had to start walking. So everyone needed a flashlight or a headlamp. We had little Thea with her bike, and we're either riding or walking slowly toward the direction of a mountain. And a mountain, this picture is blurry on purpose because a mountain looks pretty blurry at night on purpose. The moon is still rising. We still can't really see it that well. Later in the night, it would be a full moon. But we have a mountain, and we've picked a spot right off the loop, right through the neighborhood, right behind the Ochoa house. And only the silhouette could be seen. However, I brought back this image to remind you that the water does not run by the base of a mountain by Barrio Kroger Lane. It is very dry over there. So that river holds a lot of memory of water. And the hope to restore it is something to be that we will hope to celebrate together. But that wash reminds us of water that used to flow. It holds people's laughter, people's joy, some grief, some tears, some contemplations, and years of lived experiences. Even though the water's not flowing, it's still being held there in that wash. So we're back to nighttime, and with Anna, we did a 5 senses journaling. So we sat down with our notebooks and we identified 5 things we could see, 4 things we could feel, 3 things we could hear, 2 things we could smell, and then whatever we were tasting from our delicious foods. And I liked that moment where we all turned off the lights because we had our headlamps because we were busy observing and writing, but we turned off the lights and then we could start to see a little bit of the stars in the sky. But then we started walking back, and we made our way back with our lights and our footsteps crunching on the gravel, past the mesquite trees, back to the inside of the house. And we sat down on that table. We were gathering together and moving into our poetry. And that is what I wanted to share with you all, is our poetry that we created together. So I actually need more volunteers for folks to stand up on stage and hold some of these things. Who would like to come up on stage and hold some of these things? You want to grab 2? I have more people who want to hold things. Yeah. I am going to pass. I'm going to read off. Thank you. Oh. It's our gallery. So what we have in the middle here is photos from our youth that took pictures and submitted them for the Living River of Words. Over here, I will read to you in just a moment our poetry. So we had a prompt and we all contributed, and together we created a tree. And the last thing that we have that I will also read to you is a poem where we spoke. The first thing that came to our mind after a prompt and sort of collaborated a poem amongst the groups of people. And so I will be reading to you the Spanish version and then the English version of this, and then I will be reading the Spanish version and the English version of that. So I'm going to start. Reading in Spanish first, and then I'll read it to you in English right after. All right. ¿De dónde soy? So this is our tree here. Amo Tucson. Soy de un lugar donde me siento comprendida, Arizona, soy de un hermoso y vasto universo. Soy de la madre tierra y también de la paz del desierto. Soy de donde anidan los aviones. Soy de las sonrisas y risas que compartimos. Soy de mi cuerpo. Soy de mi linaje familiar. Soy de Dios. Soy de un lugar al que pertenezco. Soy de un hogar donde se va a la iglesia los domingos, cambiarse de ropa de iglesia a ropa de juego. Mamá preparando una deliciosa cena dominical. Soy del lugar donde escucho a los pájaros todos los días. Soy de Tucson. Soy de mi madre Monique. Soy del maravilloso desierto. Soy de la comunidad del barrio. Soy de las estrellas que se esconden y de los autos que se van demasiado rápido. Soy de la forma en que el agua no fluye o no fluyó. Soy de una cultura mexicana. Soy de los arcoíris y del amor. Soy del gran mezquite en un patio delantero de donde me escondía para espiar los transuentes de colecciones de esqueletos ahuecados, de cigarras y rocas frescas, de rodillas peladas y piel salada. Soy de un viaje de amor, disciplina y trabajo para cuidar a los niños, la familia, con los animales de la madre tierra, el río, la montaña del Padre Dios Creador. Soy de una casa donde puedo ver a mi papá los fines de semana o en vacaciones. Voy a un lugar nuevo donde mi papá y yo vivimos en una casa con mi mamá, mi hermano y nuestros 3 perros, incluyendo uno de ellos que es mío, Pon. Soy de Sonora, México, donde las flores florecen, donde los autos y camiones deambulan, donde las estrellas están sobre ti brillando como un diamante. Soy de carne asada, bajo una luna llena de amigos y palabras. Soy de letras minúsculas y tareas extra, de expectativas casi perfectas de los profesores. Soy de Einstein y de sonreírme al espejo. Soy de asombroso o suficiente. Soy del jardín cuidado con esmero y del río, vacío pero gigantesco por la noche. Where I am from. I love Tucson. I am from a place where I feel understood, Arizona. I am from a beautiful, large universe. I am from Mother Nature and also from the peaceful desert. I am from where airplanes go to nest. I am from the smiles and laughter we share. I am from my body. I am from my family bloodline. I am from God. I am from a place where I belong. I am from a home of church on Sundays, changing from church clothes to play clothes, mom making a delicious Sunday dinner. I am from the place where I hear the birds every day. I am from Tucson. I am from my mother, Monique. I am from the wonderful desert. I am from the barrio community. I am from the stars that hide and the cars that drive too quickly. I am from the way in which the water didn't flow. I am from a Mexican culture. I am from rainbows and love. I am from the big mesquite in my front yard where I hide to spy on passerby, from collections of hollowed cicada skeletons and cool rocks, from skin knees and salty skin. I am from a journey of love, discipline, and work to take care of children, family, and animals, of Mother Earth, river, mountain, of Father, Creator, God. I am from a house where I can see my dad on the weekend, or on break, I go somewhere new with my dad, and I live in a house with my mom, brother, and our 3 dogs, with one of them that is mine, Pon. I am from Sonora, Mexico, where the flowers bloom, where the cars and trucks roam, where the stars are above you, shining bright like a diamond. I am from carne asada, under a full moon with friends and words. I am from minuscule lettering and extra credit homework, from almost perfect expectations from teachers. I am from Einstein and beaming at myself in the mirror. I am from amazing or enough. I am from the garden, carefully tended, and the river empty, but gargantuous at nighttime. Almost done here. We have reunámonos de una manera floreciente. ¿Qué te trae alegría? Reunámonos de una manera floreciente. Familia, tranquilidad, soledad, música, queso a la plancha, risas, amigos, tus deportes, igualdad, familia, primera luz en el jardín, perros comprensivos, amigos, colores, amor a Tucson, atardeceres, amigos, amabilidad, mangos, familia, tu libro favorito, árboles y bebidas, atardeceres, bebés, mascotas, bosques, agua corriente, saguaros en evolución, el océano, comunidad. Reunámonos de una manera floreciente. Let us gather in a flourishing way. What brings you joy? Let us gather in a flourishing way. Family, quietness, solitude, music, grilled cheese, laughter, friends, your sports, equality, family, first light in the garden, dogs understanding, friends, colors, love Tucson, sunsets, friends, kindness, mangoes, family, your favorite book, trees and drinks, sunsets, babies, pets, forests, running water, saguaros evolving, the ocean, community. Let us gather in a flourishing way.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. And thank you for our helpers, all our helpers, you know? So there shouldn't be any excuse why we should make time for all the river, all our children, no? And then back from one extent to the other. Because with everything happening, let's not think about what's happening, but the moment now of how we can come together in this way. Por favor, gracias.
I have one more thing to mention, that you get to hang all of these in the gallery of the Ochoa House.
Thank you for such a beautiful gift. Then we'll continue during the summer for our summer poetry, and we're all invited on July 13th to the 17th, and along the river. So open invitation so we can continue on por el río. ¿No?
And we do have a few minutes, so if this prompted any questions around education, poetry, connectivity, the right people are here in the room. And will continue to be in the room. So again, thank you to this group. Thank you to our volunteers. Beautiful and excellent ending to the day. Thank you.